Tonight, we're breaking down the darkest conspiracy theories in Pokémon that turned out to be true. This is one of those topics with more beneath the surface, but I'll keep the tone calm so you can relax into the story. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Imagine, for a moment, that it is the late 1990s. The world feels a little bit smaller, a little bit more mysterious. You are sitting in the back seat of a car at night, the only light coming from the passing street lamps that momentarily illuminate the screen of your Game Boy. You are exploring the Kanto region, a place of bright colors, upbeat music, and the promise of friendship with incredible creatures. To millions of us, Pokémon was the ultimate escape. It was a world where 10-year-olds could travel the land, become heroes, and bond with powerful allies. But even back then, in those early days of 8-bit sprites and chirping MIDI soundtracks, there was a lingering sense that something wasn't quite right. There were whispers on the early internet, rumors passed around the school playground, and strange occurrences in the game that felt too deliberate to be mere accidents. We called them conspiracies. We called them urban legends. We told ourselves they were just the products of overactive imaginations, ghost stories designed to give a bit of edge to a children's franchise. However, as the years turned into decades, and as the franchise grew from a simple pair of Japanese role-playing games into a global phenomenon spanning 9 generations, the mask began to slip. The developers at Game Freak began to leave breadcrumbs. New entries in the Pokédex started to confirm our worst fears. Hidden journals in abandoned laboratories, subtle changes in regional geography, and even the revelation of scrapped development code began to paint a much grimmer picture of the Pokémon world. What we once thought were just creepy fan theories turned out to be the intentional, canonical foundation of the universe. Tonight, we are going to peel back those layers of colorful nostalgia and look at the cold, hard reality that lies beneath. We are going to explore the tragedy of a world built on the ruins of war, the horror of creatures that prey on the innocent, and the heartbreaking truth of what happens when a Pokémon dies. The stakes of these revelations are higher than they might seem at first glance. For many of us, Pokémon was our first introduction to the concept of a secondary world. It shaped our understanding of adventure and companionship. To find out that this world is actually haunted by the ghosts of human tragedy, or that some of our favorite companions are actually the resurrected spirits of the deceased, changes everything. It forces us to look at the entire franchise through a different lens. This isn't just about a few scary Pokédex entries meant to spice up a ghost-type Pokémon's profile. This is about a consistent, underlying narrative of trauma, loss, and the supernatural that has been present. Geography of the Kanto region was originally mapped directly over the site of the Hiroshima bombing, or that the friendly balloon Pokémon you see in the park is canonically known for dragging children to the afterlife. The world of Pokémon transforms from a playground into a landscape of survival. Why would a company like Nintendo, known for its family-friendly image, allow such darkness to permeate its most successful brand? Perhaps it is because Pokémon has always been, at its heart, a reflection of the real world. It was created by Satoshi Tajiri, a man who spent his childhood catching insects in the rural areas of Japan before they were paved over by urban sprawl. The series has always been about the relationship between humanity and nature is not always kind. It is often brutal, unforgiving, and deeply mysterious. By grounding the Pokémon world in these darker truths, the creators have given it a depth and a weight that most other franchises lack. It makes the world feel lived in. It makes the history of the regions feel ancient and heavy with the weight of past events. Tonight, we are going deep into the mysteries that have haunted the community for over 25 years. We will examine the silence of Lavender Town and the real-world historical parallels that make its atmosphere so oppressive. We will look at the strange, fragmented language of the Unown and the chilling evidence that links them to one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century. We will talk about the predators that hide in plain sight, using hypnosis and playful appearances to lure the vulnerable away from safety. We will also dive into the cycle of life and death, looking at the Pokémon that are not born, but made from the shadows of others, and the legendary beings that only exist because of a devastating fire that claimed the lives of the innocent. The deeper we go, the more we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be a Pokémon trainer in a world like this? Is the bond between a human and a Pokémon truly one of friendship? Or is it a necessary alliance in a world where the spirits of the dead are constantly reaching out from the shadows? As we move through these chapters, I want you to let the atmosphere of these stories wash over you. Think back to those nights with the Game Boy, the way the music changed when you entered the Pokémon Tower, and the feeling of unease you couldn't quite explain. The answers were always there, hidden in the text, waiting for us to grow old enough to understand them. We will start with the origins, the very foundations of the Kanto region, where the line between fiction and history is thinner than you might think. We will move through the Johto region, where the flames of the burned tower still cast long shadows over the present. We will look at the modern discoveries in the Alola and Galar regions, where the Pokédex has become more explicit than ever about the dangers lurking in the tall grass. This is a journey into the heart of a world we thought we knew, a world that is much darker, much older, and much more intentional than we ever suspected. There is a certain comfort in knowing the truth, even if the truth is unsettling. It allows us to see the full picture, to appreciate the craftsmanship that went into creating a universe that can be both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. So settle in, let the sounds of the night settle around you. We are going to uncover the secrets that were never meant to stay hidden. We are going to look at the ghosts in the machine, the shadows in the code, and the terrifying reality of the Pokémon world. From the atomic trauma of the early designs to the kidnapping myths that became canon, this is the definitive look at the darkest conspiracies that turned out to be true. As we begin this exploration, remember that every legend has a grain of truth, and in the world of Pokémon, those grains of truth have grown into mountains. The silence of a ghost-type Pokémon isn't just an absence of sound. It is a story waiting to be told. The mask held by a Yamask isn't just a decorative item. It is a literal face from a past life. The wind that blows through the ruins of an ancient city isn't just weather. It is the crying of spirits that were never given a chance to rest. We are going to listen to those stories tonight. We are going to look at the evidence, the developer interviews, the beta maps, and the official lore that confirms what the fans have suspected for decades. The journey ahead is a long one, spanning multiple regions and hundreds of years of in-game history. But we have all the time in the world. The lights are low, the air is still, and the secrets of the Pokémon world are finally ready to be revealed. Let's step out of the light of the Pokémon Center and into the tall grass, where the real stories are waiting. Let's find out what really happened in the burned tower. Let's discover why the Unown were found where they were. Let's understand the true nature of the shadow that follows every Clefable. This is the dark side of your childhood, the hidden history of your favorite games, and the confirmation of the theories that kept us awake at night. Tonight, we are not just playing a game. We are witnessing the unfolding of a grand, dark design. A design that proves that even in a world of monsters and magic, the most frightening things are often the ones that are true. So, take a deep breath, relax, let the journey begin. We are going back to where it all started, to the very first generation, where a small team of developers in Japan decided to build a world that was as haunted as it was hopeful. We are going to find the truth behind the Lavender Town syndrome, the mystery of the missing evolution lines, and the chilling reality of the child-snatching spirits. This is the deep dive you have been waiting for. This is the truth about the world of Pokémon. As we transition into our first chapter, think about the silence. Think about the spaces between the notes of the music. Think about the things the NPCs don't say, and the things the Pokédex only hints at. We are going to fill in those blanks. We are going to shine a light into the darkest corners of the franchise. And when we are done, you will never look at a Poké the same way again. You will see the history, the trauma, and the spirits that dwell within. You will see the world for what it truly is. A beautiful, terrifying masterpiece of hidden horror and confirmed conspiracies. Let us begin our descent into the darkness. Let us uncover the secrets of the ruins, the truth of the spirits, and the reality of the war that shaped the world. This is the beginning of a 4.5-hour journey into the soul of Pokémon. Stay calm, stay relaxed, and let the stories guide you into the night. We are starting now. Pokémon is a world of bright colors, cheerful music, and the promise of friendship. But beneath that pastel surface, the games have always carried a shadow, a secret history written in the margins of Pokédex entries, in the glitches of old cartridges, and in the landscapes that mirror real-world tragedy. For years, fans whispered about these darker elements on forums and playgrounds, dismissed as overactive imaginations reading too much into a children's game. But then, one by one, those whispers started to find confirmation in official materials. The rumors evolved from speculation to documented fact, and the Mask of Innocence that Pokémon had worn for decades began to slip. It started with small things. A Pokédex entry that described Drifloon luring children to the afterlife, not as a playful spirit, but as a predator. A journal entry in a later game that confirmed Hypno had been seen picking up a child from school. These were no longer just fan theories, they were text in the code, written by the developers themselves. The line between playground folklore and canonical lore had blurred, and what emerged was a much darker picture of the Pokémon world than the anime's sunny tones ever suggested. To understand how deep this goes, you have to look at the origins. The franchise was born in Japan, a country whose history includes the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the earliest beta version of Pokémon Red and Blue, the ruins where the strange, floating creatures called the Unown were found sat directly over Hiroshima on the in-game map. That map mirrored real geography. The Unown themselves were fragmented, ghostly shapes, eerily reminiscent of the shadows left behind in the aftermath of the blast. Developers later removed that direct connection, but the imagery remained. The seeds of trauma were planted in the code from the very beginning. And then there is the story of the burned tower, the charred ruin in Johto, where 3 unnamed Pokémon perished in a fire. According to the narrative finally confirmed in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Ho-Oh resurrected them, transforming them into the legendary beasts Entei, Raikou, and Suicune. That is not metaphor. That is literal resurrection from death, baked into the lore. The 3 beasts are the reincarnated souls of the dead, a cycle of death and rebirth that echoes the franchise's growing fascination with mortality. But perhaps no location in Pokémon embodies that fascination more than Lavender Town. A place built around a tower that is, in fact, a massive graveyard for Pokémon. The music there is infamous, a discordant lullaby that has haunted players for generations. Within those walls, you find the ghost of a Mother Marowak, her spirit unable to move on because her child was orphaned. The Cubone story, a creature that wears the skull of its deceased mother, is one of the most melancholic in gaming, and all of this was present in the very first generation. The Lavender Town phenomenon is not just a backdrop, it is a gateway. It stands as the original proof that the Pokémon world is not safe, that death is real, and that the cute creatures you capture carry histories of loss and violence. The fan theories that grew up around this town, about its frequency, about the game's audio being designed to cause headaches or worse, may have seemed like urban legends, but they were rooted in something genuine. The developers themselves leaned into that atmosphere, returning to Lavender Town in later generations, deepening its mystery. And it is that mystery, that specific frequency of haunting sound, that we need to examine more closely, because what started as a rumor about a ghost in the game's music has become one of the most enduring and chilling legends in all of gaming. A legend that, when you strip away the exaggeration, reveals a truth about how carefully the creators wove darkness into the fabric of their cheerful world. That is what the next chapter is about. The Lavender Town frequency, not just a glitch or a spooky tune, but a signal that connects the game's deepest fears to the real world. And the story behind it may be the most unsettling truth of all. You remember the feeling, the first time you walked into Lavender Town as a kid. That eerie, repetitive melody started playing, and something felt wrong. It wasn't just the graveyard imagery or the ghost Pokémon, it was the music itself. For years, a story circulated online, whispered in forums and around schoolyards. Children in Japan suffered headaches, nosebleeds, even hallucinations, after hearing the original Lavender Town theme from the 1996 release. They called it Lavender Town Syndrome. And while the mass hysteria was never officially confirmed, the rumor stuck. But what if the truth behind it was less about frequencies and more about the developers' deliberate choice to make a town that felt like a funeral? After we peeled back the Mask of Innocence in the first chapter, we saw that Pokémon was never just a cheerful adventure. The darker lore embedded in Pokédex entries and beta maps was always there, waiting to be noticed. Now, we need to re-examine that infamous soundtrack and realize something crucial. Lavender Town was never meant to be a happy place. It was designed as a monument to death. The original 1996 soundtrack used a high-frequency tone, something that some listeners claimed caused discomfort. Whether or not the syndrome was a real phenomenon, the psychological impact was undeniable. The music, with its haunting chiptune notes, created a sense of unease that no other route or city could replicate. It was a deliberate tonal shift, and that shift was tied directly to the town's identity. Lavender Town wasn't just a location, it was a memorial. The entire town existed to house the Pokémon Tower, a graveyard for fallen creatures. The developers used the concept of mourning to ground the fantasy world in reality. They built a place where the game stopped, where you had to confront loss. When you entered the tower, you weren't battling trainers or catching rare Pokémon. You were walking through floors of spirits. The ghost of a Marowak, the mother of a Cubone, haunted the tower, crying for her child. That moment turned a simple children's game into a meditation on grief. The music became the soundtrack for that grief. And it wasn't just in the tower. The entire town was draped in that atmosphere. The locals spoke of ghosts. The channelers performed rituals. The message was clear. Death is part of this world. The transition from urban legend to the realization of the town's role as a graveyard happens when you stop seeing the syndrome as a mysterious side effect and start seeing the music as a tool. The developers didn't accidentally make a creepy song. They intentionally composed something that would stick in your mind, that would make you feel the weight of the tower's story. They used dissonance and high pitches to create a memory you couldn't shake. And in doing so, they made Lavender Town the most memorable and the most unsettling location in the original games. But the deeper you dig into the game's code, the more you find. The ghost of Marowak is only the beginning. There are secrets hidden in the original data, things that were cut or changed, things that suggest the developers had an even darker vision. And that's where our next chapter begins. In the forbidden territory of beta maps, where the geography of Kanto holds secrets that never made it to the final release. The data is still there, waiting to be decoded, and what it reveals might change how you see the entire Pokémon world. Beta maps and forbidden data hold the key to a truth that was almost lost. The sound of that original Lavender Town theme, the one that haunted so many childhood memories, wasn't just a coincidence of bad audio programming. In the previous chapter, we traced the transition from urban legend to the realization that Lavender Town was never meant to be a cheerful stop on the journey. It was a graveyard, a place where the game's first truly honest confrontation with death took place. But that single melody, and the town it belonged to, turned out to be only the first layer of something much deeper. Something that had been hidden in the game's code from the very beginning, waiting for data miners and determined fans to uncover it decades later. If you've ever wondered just how much darker the original vision for Pokémon really was, you have to look at what was left behind. Not in the final release, but in the leaked beta assets from 1996. These aren't rumors or fan fantasy. They're fragments of code, early maps, and discarded designs that were never meant to see the light of day. And what they reveal is a world that was far more grounded, far more tragic, and far more connected to real-world history than anyone could have imagined. The most important of these discoveries came from a set of ROMs and development files that surfaced online around 2010. They contained what is now referred to as the Pokémon Blue beta, the internal prototype that predated even the Japanese Red and Green releases. In these files, the world of Kanto looked very different. The map was unfinished, the routes were shifted, and some locations simply didn't exist yet. But one structure stood out, labeled with a cryptic three-letter code, Alph. It wasn't a placeholder, it wasn't a random abbreviation. ALF was the internal name for a set of ruins that were supposed to sit at the very heart of the Kanto region. In the final games, we know these ruins as the place where you encounter the Unown, the strange, floating, letter-shaped Pokémon whose purpose was never fully explained. But in the beta, those ruins were positioned over a very particular spot on the map. When you overlay the early Kanto geography with the real-world layout of Japan, That spot lines up almost exactly with the city of Hiroshima. Now, think about that for a moment. The Unown, those floating, fragmented, ghostly symbols, were originally meant to be discovered in a ruin directly above the city that had been devastated by an atomic bomb just 50 years earlier. Their design isn't cute, it's unsettling. They don't move like normal Pokémon. They drift, disconnected, as if they're not entirely there. Their name in Japanese, Unown, carries the same weight as the word for ghost or spirit. And in the beta, they weren't just a puzzle, they were something else. Something that the developers chose to bury before the game ever reached store shelves. The code of that beta tells a story that the final game refused to tell. There are references to a character called the Ghost Girl, to an unused elevator in the Pokémon Tower, and to a scrapped evolution path for Marowak that would have turned it into Kangaskhan. That last one is particularly telling. In the final games, the ghost of Marowak haunts Lavender Tower, and Cubone wears the skull of its dead mother. But in the beta, the connection was even more direct. A Pokémon that literally evolved by dying, its spirit taking on a new form. Death wasn't just a backdrop, it was a mechanic. These early development choices hint at a world where Pokémon were not simply creatures to be battled and befriended, but beings with a history of loss, of trauma, of real consequence. The game's director at the time, Satoshi Tajiri, had spoken in interviews about how his inspiration came from his childhood love of insect collecting, but also from the scars left on Japan by war and disaster. He wanted to create a world that felt alive, but not sanitized. A world where danger and sadness existed alongside adventure. The leaked beta confirms that this vision was far more literal than anyone realized. The Alph ruins, the Hiroshima placement, the ghostly Unown. These weren't just accidental details. They were part of a narrative that was deemed too heavy, too raw, for a children's game. So it was removed, rewritten, rebranded, as a simple puzzle in a cave. But the code doesn't forget, and once you know where to look, you start noticing other pieces of the puzzle that never quite fit. The map itself, in that early build, is drawn with a sense of weight. Towns are closer together, routes are narrower, the world feels smaller, more cramped, almost claustrophobic. There's no Celadon City as we know it, only a warehouse district, no safari zone, just a fenced-off area labeled as a military reservation. The geographical layout mirrors the real Kanto region of Japan, and in that real region, the city of Hiroshima sits at the southern edge, not far from where the ruins are placed. It's a direct, uncomfortable reference. The deeper you dig into those beta files, the more you realize that the entire foundation of Pokémon was built on a foundation of forbidden data. Data that was sealed away, not because it was broken, but because it was truthful in a way that might have broken the illusion. And yet, some of it survived. The Unown made it into the final game, though stripped of their original context. The ghost of Marowak still appears in Lavender Tower. The theme of death still lingers in the soundtrack. But the full story, the one that connects the Alph ruins to Hiroshima, that ties the fragmented ghosts to the souls of the atomic dead, that story was never told. Until now. And that brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, a theory that takes this geographic connection and pushes it even further, suggesting that the Unown weren't just placed over Hiroshima by accident, but that they were designed from the beginning to represent the victims of the bombings. It's a theory that some dismissed as too dark, too morbid, until later interviews and archival documents confirmed that the developers had indeed researched the historical tragedy when designing the ruins. In the next chapter, we'll explore that connection in full, and you'll see just how deep the Hiroshima thread runs through the earliest moments of Pokémon's creation. The name of that story is The Hiroshima Connection, and it will change the way you look at every ghost type you've ever encountered. We left off with the leaked beta assets from 1996, the blue prototype, and the discovery of those mysterious ruins labelled Alph on the early Kanto map. That fragment of code, that ghost in the machine, was more than a glitch. It was a clue pointing towards something much larger. Something that forces us to reconsider the very geography of the Pokémon world. Because when you align the Kanto region with a map of real-world Japan, the dots connect in a way that is impossible to ignore. The Pokémon world has always mirrored Japan. Kanto sits in the east, Yoto to the west, Oin further southwest, Sinnoh to the north. The same arrangement as the actual Japanese islands. This is not a secret. Game Freak themselves have acknowledged it. But what happens when you overlay the original game map, the beta map where the Alph ruins were hidden, onto the real geography of Japan? You find that the coordinates of those ruins, the exact location where the Unown were meant to appear, line up with the city of Hiroshima. Let that sit for a moment. In the real world, Hiroshima is a place defined by a single catastrophic moment, the atomic bombing of August 6, 1945. In the beta Pokémon map, the ruins that housed the Unown were placed directly over Hiroshima. Now, coincidence is possible. But when you combine that placement with the design and behavior of the creatures found there, the pattern becomes a message. The Unown themselves are not like other Pokémon. They are floating, fragmented, almost ghostly shapes. Each one resembles a letter, but they exist in a state of constant silent drift. They appear in ruins, in places of forgotten history, and they do not speak. Their very name suggests something unknown, something lost. In early documentation, they were referred to as the Unknown, and their visual language is one of brokenness. They are not whole creatures. They are remnants. Fragments of a population that no longer exists. Look at their eyes, those hollow, staring orbs. Look at the way they hover, disconnected from the ground, from the world. They evoke the imagery of shadows burned into stone, the silhouettes of people vaporized in an instant. In the aftermath of the Hiroshima bombing, one of the most haunting phenomena was the human shadows. The outlines of victims left on walls and pavements where the blast had etched their final moment into the surface. The Unown are not just letters, they are those shadows. They are the ghostly echoes of a lost populace, trapped in an endless silent loop, waiting to be found. And what did we find them doing? In the games, the Unown appear in ruins, often in the Salashian ruins or the Alph ruins, the same Alph ruins from the beta. They are tied to puzzles, to ancient writing, to communication from a time before. But they are also tied to something darker. In Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the Unown are connected to the Sinjo ruins, where Arceus can be summoned. That is lore for another moment. The point is that their placement was never accidental. The coordinates of the Unown ruins in the beta map are the coordinates of Hiroshima. Now, does this mean that Game Freak intentionally built a memorial to atomic trauma into the very fabric of their first generation? Some fans argue yes, others call it a coincidence. But when you look at the broader context of the franchise, Lavender Town, the burned tower, Cubone's mother, the ghosts of children, the pattern becomes undeniable. Pokémon has always been a series about death, about what remains after tragedy, and the Unown, those floating, broken letters, are the clearest expression of that theme. They are not just collectibles, they are remnants. They are the fragmented consciousness of a people who are no longer there. Their design mirrors the blast shadows, their habitat mirrors the ruined city, and their behavior mirrors the silence of a cemetery. In the games, you can only catch them in one location, often deep inside a cave or a ruin. They are hidden, just as the truth about Hiroshima was hidden from many young players who grew up with these games. But the evidence is there. The beta map is real. The coordinates line up. The visual language is deliberate. The Unown are not a puzzle. They are a monument. And in the final moments of this chapter, you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of a monument? It is to remember, to ensure that the fragments of what was lost are not scattered and forgotten. The Unown are those fragments. They are the broken letters of a story that cannot be fully told. And that story is far from over, because the Unown themselves are only one piece of a larger, darker puzzle. Their connection to the ruins, to the ancient writing, to the very language of reality in the Pokémon world, suggests that they are not just ghosts. They are the building blocks of something far more terrifying. What happens when those fragments are assembled? What happens when the unknown becomes known? That is a question we will face when we turn to the ruins themselves. and to the tragedy they encode, the final, silent meaning behind the unknown. The fragments of tragedy. The overlay of the Kanto region onto the map of Japan left us with a disturbing clarity. The ruins that would eventually house the unknown weren't placed randomly in the beta code. They sat directly over the city of Hiroshima, a digital scar on the landscape. This wasn't just world building, it was a cartographic memorial, but it leads to a far more unsettling question. What exactly were these strange glyphs meant to represent? And why did the developers choose to leave so much of their origin unspoken? In the earliest scripts of the game, these creatures weren't called Unown at all. They were simply the unknown. That name carries a profound weight. When you consider the context of the Hiroshima Connection, these are not just rare psychic types with a quirky gimmick based on the alphabet. They are the manifestation of the unknown dead, the faceless victims, the unrecognizable remains, the ones whose names were erased from existence entirely. They float through the ruins of Alph as cryptic, indecipherable symbols. But what if they aren't letters? What if they are the fragments of a language that was never meant to be deciphered? The developers crafted a species that communicates in enigmas, a perfect vessel for the deafening silence that follows an unspeakable tragedy. The unknown weren't a gimmick. They were a confession buried in the code. Look closely at their physical design. The unknown are flat, distorted, floating shapes. Their bodies contort into various forms of the alphabet, but they always look fragmented, as if they are projections of something that was violently unmade. This directly evokes the haunting imagery of the atomic shadows, the human silhouettes that were permanently etched into the walls and streets of Hiroshima. At the exact moment of the blast, the unknown are not biological creatures. They are after images, the prints of a single horrible moment frozen in blinding light. They hover in the ruins not as living Pokémon, but as the eternal echoes of those who were vaporized. Their shadows now drifting aimlessly through a forgotten digital underworld. The alphabet of the unknown is the alphabet of the dead. This is the core of the theory that the developers intentionally chose to distance themselves from the original concept. The shift from the unknown to the unknown is an incredibly subtle but profoundly significant act of rebranding. By standardizing their name into a specific collective species, they transformed them from a memorial into a collectible puzzle, a game mechanic. This provided perfect plausible deniability. The imagery of the shadows remains, the ruins remain, but the explicit geographic link to Hiroshima was scrubbed from the final game's map. The coordinates were removed. The developers never officially acknowledged the connection, yet the ghosts of that original idea persist, trapped in the very fabric of the ruins of Alph, communicating in a language of trauma, daring you to decode their true meaning. The decision to bury this origin story reveals a fascinating tension between artistic expression and commercial branding. But the geography of the Pokémon world holds far more secrets than just this one phantom ruin. The placement of the ruins of Alph itself, and its connection to the real-world locations of Johto, opens a door to another layer of this hidden history, a mystery that completely recontextualizes the entire map and the cultures that built it. That is the story of the ruins of Alph and real-world geography. We left the unknown as floating fragments, ghostly letters carved into the fabric of a forgotten age. Their shapes are not random. They are echoes, silhouettes of something that once stood in a flash of impossible light. If the unknown are the residue of a tragedy, then where exactly do they call home? The ruins of Alph are not just a puzzle in the Johto region. They are a geographical anchor to a story that the games never quite speak aloud. Johto itself is a pastoral counterpart to Kanto's industrial sprawl, but its real-world inspiration draws from the ancient heart of Japan, the Kansai region. Kyoto Nara, the temple bells of old. Yet the ruins of Alph sit in the center of Johto, a labyrinth of crumbling stone and unreadable script. In the original beta map, those same ruins were labeled Alph, and they sat directly over the city of Hiroshima on the map of Kanto. The final games moved them, repositioned them into Johto, but the symbolic weight never lifted. The question becomes, why would a children's game layer its mythology over a site of atomic catastrophe? The answer might lie in the radio. If you ever played Pokémon Gold or Silver, you remember the Pokégear, that plastic brick of a device that let you listen to tunes while you walked through the grass. Most stations play cheerful jingles, the kind you hum without thinking. But there is one frequency, buried deep in the ruins of Alph, that produces no melody. Instead, you hear a steady, non-musical tone, a series of beeps that seem to pulse with no rhythm you can dance to. It is eerie, it is empty, and it is the closest thing to a voice the Unown have. Fans have long speculated that this radio signal is a distress call from the Unown themselves, a communication from beings trapped between dimensions. But when you place the ruins over Hiroshima, the tone takes on another meaning. In the aftermath of the atomic bomb, radio frequencies were scrambled, filled with static and strange interference. Some survivors reported hearing a low hum that never quite faded. The game's signal might be a faint echo of that, a recording of the moment the world was torn apart, preserved in the language of the dead. This is where the games perform their most subtle trick. They take ancient mythology, the idea that the Unown are primordial gods who shaped reality itself, and they set that mythology directly on top of a 20th century tragedy. The message is not explicit, but it is unmistakable. The Unown are not just ancient, they are also modern. They are the unknown dead, the souls that had no tomb, the shadows burned into stone. The ruins of Alph become a memorial, a place where the past and the present collapse into one another. The bridge between ancient and modern is not built with words. It is built with geography and sound. A map that was drawn in the early 90s, a beta file that leaked years later, and a radio tone that no one ever forgot. Together, they tell a story that the game never put into text. It is a story about how we remember catastrophe, how we place it into myth, so we can live with its shape. That radio signal is not the only strange voice hiding in the tall grass. There are other frequencies that sing of predators with gentle hands, of children led away into the dark, and those are the ones we will follow next. The signal from the ruins of Alph was a voice from the past, a static hum of tragedy echoing through the Yoto countryside. It shifted our gaze downward, into the earth, into the history of a world shaped by loss. But the Pokémon world has a present too, and that present lives in the tall grass. We were trained from childhood to walk into it, to brush against the blades and wait for the battle cry, the friendly monster that wants to be our partner, our companion, our friend. But the tall grass is not a petting zoo, it is a wilderness, and it has predators. This is the moment where the conspiracy theories take a turn away from the historical and toward the biological. The atomic shadows of the Unown were the ghosts of a specific horror, but the creatures that live in the tall grass represent a different kind of darkness. They are not resting spirits. They are living, breathing biological entities, and their biology demands survival. The beautiful lie of Pokémon is that every creature is a potential friend, a loyal beast waiting for a trainer to unlock its potential. The Pokédex, the very field guide we are given, tells a different story. It whispers of the Gengar that follows you in the dark, absorbing your warmth. The Haunter that licks you and your soul begins to separate. The Alakazam whose IQ is so high it can read minds, control events, and exists in its own dimension of pure thought, utterly detached from the human who caught it. These are not tools of friendship. They are forces of nature, and nature is red in tooth and claw. The absolute subversion of the narrative, the full collapse of the friendly companion myth, comes when you realize that some Pokémon do not just live in the grass, they hunt in it, and they hunt us. The most widely circulated whispers in the old internet chat rooms, the tales dismissed as paranoid fan fiction, were the stories of Pokémon that specifically target humans, not as a territorial dispute, not as an act of defense, but as prey. This was the line that most fans refused to cross. The idea that the innocent ball of fluff, the quirky ghost, the misunderstood psychic, could be a predator of children and adults alike, was simply too grim for a game built on friendship. But the games, as they always do, kept receipts. Generation 7 Pokémon Sun and Moon ripped the mask off completely. In a small, unassuming location on the island of Ula Ula, a researcher keeps a journal. It is not a story of a Pokémon being helped. It is a witness statement. A journal entry explicitly states that Hypno was seen picking up a child at school. It does not say battling. It does not say playing. It says picking up. The implication is violent, predatory, and deeply sinister. The fan theory, once laughed at in forums, argued that Hypno was not just a Pokémon that put people to sleep. The conspiracy was that Hypno was a kidnapper, that its pendulum was not a tool for hypnosis, but a lure, and the game quietly confirmed it. The Pokédex entries across generations had already hinted at it. Hypno carries a pendulum that makes its victims sleep. It preys on the unwary. It was always there, hiding in the text. Sun and Moon just stopped pretending. This confirmation validates an entire class of theories. The idea that the Pokémon world is not a safe haven for children. The game's opening, where Professor Oak tells you the world is full of Pokémon and to be safe, takes on a new meaning. The tall grass is the hunting ground. The Hypno, the Gengar, the Haunter, the ghastly that can smother you with its gas. The creature that will take your hand and never let go. We have been walking through a jungle. The friendly battle sprites, the cute cries, the catchy battle music, these are the camouflage of the franchise. The actual lore, buried in the Pokédex and the environmental storytelling, is a survival guide. Do not trust the darkness. Do not trust the pendulum. Do not trust the friendly hand reaching out from the tall grass. And of all these predators, there is one that embodies this portrayal most perfectly. A Pokémon that looks like a children's toy. A party decoration, a lost helium balloon. It floats on the breeze, innocent and light. It reaches out a hand. And every single Pokédex entry, from Diamond and Pearl to Sun and Moon, agrees on its nature. It is a spirit that tries to lure children to the afterlife. Let that idea settle in the quiet of the room. The world of Pokémon, built on a foundation of companionship and adventure, has always had these dark figures moving through the periphery. The historical tragedies gave us the ghosts of the past, but the biological horrors, the creatures that hunt us, are the ghosts of the present. They are the reason the tall grass sways. They are the reason the game gives you a Pokéball and tells you to be careful. The most charming masks often hide the deepest voids. This is where our story of the dark truth of the Pokémon world takes us next. To the floating hand in the dark, to the balloon that only children can see, to the creature we call the Child-Snatcher, Drifloon. The proof that not every hand reached out to you is an offer of friendship. Some of them are invitations to the end. In the previous chapter, we began our descent from the grand historical tragedies that shaped the world of Pokémon into the more intimate, biological horrors that hide in the tall grass. We saw how the franchise carefully constructs a friendly companion narrative, only to subvert it with entries that suggest these creatures are not always our friends. Some are predators, and the most disturbing among them are those that wear a mask of innocence. Today we are focusing on one such figure, a Pokémon that looks like a child's party decoration, but whose true nature has been slowly, methodically confirmed over multiple generations. This is Drifloon, and its story is not about playing tag, but about kidnapping children to the afterlife. To understand how this grim reality became canon, we have to look at the evolution of Drifloon's Pokédex entries, starting with the very first games it appeared in. Back in Diamond and Pearl, Drifloon was introduced as a ghost type, which already placed it in the realm of spirits and the dead. Its original entry was careful, almost vague. It said that Drifloon is a Pokémon formed from a collection of souls, and that it carries small children away, but the phrasing was ambiguous enough that many players assumed it was just a playful trick, a balloon that carried kids off for a ride and then brought them back. The entry in Platinum expanded slightly, noting that it tugs on children's hands but still left room for interpretation. As the generations passed, however, the language grew more specific and more chilling. In black and white, the wording shifted to include the phrase, "Lure children to the afterlife," moving from a simple abduction to a direct connection with death. It was no longer just carrying them away. It was guiding them toward the world of the dead. Then came Sun and Moon, and with them the definitive confirmation that this theory was not a theory at all. The Alolan Pokédex entry for Drifloon states explicitly, "Stories go that it grabs the hands of small children and drags them away to the afterlife." That is not a metaphor. It is not a folktale meant to scare trainers. It is a direct statement of fact within the game's own lore. But the confirmation of Drifloon as a Child-Snatcher does not stop at a single entry. Sun also added a detail that deepens the horror, the phenomenon known as Drifloon season. In Alola, there are periods when Drifloon gather in unusually large numbers, and the local people have learned to keep their children indoors during these times. The game tells us that these mass appearances are when Drifloon are most active in their attempts to lure kids away. This is not some rare occurrence mentioned in a single line of text. It is woven into the cultural fabric of the region. Parents warn their children. Schools issue precautions. The Drifloon season is a seasonal threat, as predictable as the tides and just as unavoidable. Consider what this means for the world of Pokémon. A creature that appears as a friendly balloon, one that might even be mistaken for a toy, is actually a spirit that actively hunts children. It uses its innocent appearance as a lure, floating up to a child and offering its string like an invitation to play. But the moment that little hand grips the cord, the Drifloon begins its ascent, not to the clouds, but to the afterlife, and the entries confirm that the child does not return. The evolution of the Pokédex entries is a slow unmasking, from a vague rumour to a terrifying certainty. Each generation pulled back another layer of the veil until we were left with the raw truth. Drifloon is a predator, and its prey is the most vulnerable. What makes this even more unsettling is the contrast between the cute design and the dark reality. Drifloon's face is simple, almost cheerful, with a tiny X for a mouth and wide round eyes. Its body is a purple balloon with a white skull and crossbones pattern that most players dismiss as a pirate motif. But that skull is no joke. It is a warning, a symbol of death that Drifloon wears openly. We just chose not to see it. The franchise has always hidden its darkest secrets in plain sight, and Drifloon is one of the clearest examples of that. The evidence was there from the beginning, but it took the cumulative weight of multiple generations, from Diamond to Sun and Moon, to force us to accept what the texts were really saying. Now, with the Drifloon season firmly established as a recurring event, the implications ripple outward across all regions. If Drifloon behaves this way in Alola, there is no reason to believe it is any different elsewhere. The same balloon that floats over the streets of Sinnoh or Unova carries the same intentions. The only difference is that, in Alola, the people have learned to recognize the pattern. They have named the season. They have adapted their lives around it. But in other regions, where the phenomenon is not as well documented, the danger is perhaps even greater because it is unrecognized. This chapter in the ongoing history of Pokémon's darkest conspiracies forces us to ask how many other creatures are hiding similar truths. Drifloon was once considered just another ghost type, a quirky balloon Pokémon that might be a bit mischievous. Now we know better, and the next time one drifting across the screen, we will remember the children it has taken, the hands it has held, and the afterlife it promises. The fantasy of a friendly monster crumbles, and we are left with a world where the most innocent face can hide the most sinister purpose. But Drifloon is not alone in its targeting of children. There is another Pokémon whose methods are even more insidious, one that uses hypnotic waves instead of a string, and whose victims are reportedly taken directly from schoolyards. That story has also been confirmed by the games, and it reveals a pattern that stretches from the playground into the darkest corners of the franchise. It is a story that deserves its own careful examination. one that will follow naturally from what we have just uncovered. The lullaby is already playing, and the children are drifting off, but they are not waking up. That is the tale of Hypno's lullaby, and it is waiting for us just ahead. The previous chapter peeled back the layers on Drifloon, a creature that uses the guise of innocence to drag children away to the afterlife. It deceives the hand, it tricks the body. But what if a predator didn't have to touch you at all? What if it could reach directly into your mind, twist your perception of reality, and command your own feet to carry you into the darkness willingly, without a single struggle? That is the distinct, deeply unsettling horror of Hypno, the roots of what the fandom would eventually call the Hypno's lullaby theory go back much further than its official confirmation. They trace back to a specific, dreamlike, and profoundly isolated location in the Sevi Islands of the Fire Red and Leaf Green remakes, Berry Forest. This isn't just a place to catch Pokémon, it is a forest haunted by an unanswered question. In the game, you encounter a young girl lost in the woods. She is scared, she is crying, and she asks you to help her find her way home. The quest itself is direct. Find the girl, return her to her father. But the environment is anything but simple. The music that plays in Berry Forest is an eerie, music box rendition of the standard route theme. It is a lullaby delivered through a cracked speaker. It is hauntingly quiet. It lulls you into a false sense of calm, and roaming the depths of this forest is a wild Hypno. The game never explicitly states that Hypno abducted the girl, but the placement was deliberate. The Hypno is there, deep in the undergrowth, near where the lost child wandered. The music plays. The theory was born. The Hypno's lullaby creepypasta grew from this soil, birthing an entire subgenre of Pokémon horror that focused on predatory behavior hiding beneath a friendly exterior. For years it remained just that, a theory, a dark reading of a game meant for children. But the image stuck. The image of a creature swinging a pendulum, inducing sleep and suggestion, in a forest that sounded like a broken music box. Then Generation 7 arrived with Pokémon Sun and Moon. The Alola region brought a beautiful, tropical aesthetic, a vacation from the grim history of prior games. But its gift to the Hypno theory was a single, devastating piece of text that changed everything. On Melemele Island, inside the trainer's school, there is a bookcase. Sitting on that bookcase is a journal. It is a simple log from the school faculty, and it reads as follows. Hypno was caught picking up a child at school yesterday. The child was found later that day, unharmed on the outskirts of town. But Hypno's pendulum is strictly forbidden on school grounds. Let that sink in. The journal does not say befriending. It does not say playing with. It says picking up. The language of a predator that specifically targets schools, a predator that uses hypnosis to lead children away to an unknown fate. This is the smoking gun. This is the most direct acknowledgement of a fan conspiracy theory in the entire history of the Pokémon franchise. Game Freak looked at decades of speculation about Hypno, looked at its design, looked at the quiet horror of the Berry Forest, and decided to canonize the darkest interpretation. The monster in the forest was real. The lullaby was not just background music, it was a hunting call. What makes Hypno so terrifying as a concept compared to a straightforward monster like Drifloon? Drifloon is a trickster. It looks like a toy. It tricks a child into holding its string. But Hypno is a puppeteer. It does not trick, it controls. Imagine the terror of being led away by your own legs. Your mind screaming at you to run, to resist, but your body obeying the slow, rhythmic swing of a pendulum. The horror of Hypno is not a quick end. It is the complete and total loss of self. The horror of being walked into the forest, your own hands at your sides, your own gaze fixed forward, completely helpless. The Hypno's lullaby theory endures because it taps into a universal childhood fear, the fear of the stranger who asks you to follow them, but who possesses a weapon you cannot fight, a psychic command you cannot refuse. It weaponizes calm. It turns a comforting melody into a leash. So if Drifloon is the monster in the shadows you might accidentally grasp, Hypno is the friendly face that is anything but. It is an external threat, a monster you can see. If only you could move your eyes away from the pendulum. But what happens when the threat is not a stranger in the forest or the schoolyard? What happens when the abductor is hiding in plain sight, sitting right next to you? A friend, a constant companion, a shadow that follows you everywhere. But whose shadow is it really? The next theory we have to face is perhaps some of the most intimate betrayal the Pokémon world has to offer. A bond so deep, a relationship so fundamental, that you never see the truth until the shadow swallows you whole. The previous chapter ended with Hypno's lullaby, echoing through a schoolyard, a predator disguised as a gentle guide. But not all darkness wears a mask of sleep. Sometimes the danger comes not from a stranger, but from a friend. Or at least, from a creature that looks like one. What if the Pokémon you trust most is actually the shadow of something else? What if its very existence depends on another's life, like a parasite wearing a familiar face? Tonight, we step into the blurred territory between symbiotic and parasitic relationships among Pokémon, and we begin to trace the outline of a theory that redefines what it means to be alive, dead, or something in between. In the wild, relationships between species are rarely simple. Some Pokémon rely on others for survival in ways that seem mutually beneficial, like the way a Remoraid clings to a Mantine, cleaning parasites and gaining protection. But others are far more sinister. Consider the Paras line. That mushroom on its back is not a decoration. It is a living organism, a parasitic fungus that takes control of its host. The Pokédex confirms that the mushroom drains nutrients from the bug, and eventually, the mushroom gains full control over the mind. What began as a companion becomes a puppet. This is symbiosis twisted into slavery, and it raises a terrifying question. How many other Pokémon are not truly themselves, but are hosts to something else? The theme of blurred identity runs deep in the lore. Some Pokémon are not even biologically alive in the traditional sense. They are shadows, echoes, or ghosts, beings that exist on the other side of death, yet interact with the living as if they were flesh and blood. The Lavender Tower ghost of Marowak is not just a sprite. It is a mother's soul tied to this world by grief. She haunts the tower, waiting for her child Cubone. That is a relationship, a ghost and her living offspring. But it is not symbiotic. It is a bond of love that death cannot sever. Yet what happens when that bond is not love, but need? What happens when a ghost cannot exist without a living counterpart? This leads us to one of the most enduring theories in Pokémon, the idea of the Shadow Pokémon. Not the artificially created Shadow Pokémon from the Ore region, but something older, more primal. The creature known as Gengar is officially classified as the Shadow Pokémon. Its body is dark purple, its eyes are red, and it is said to lurk in the shadows, waiting to curse those who cross its path. But look closely at its shape. The round body, the stubby arms, the pointed ears. It is almost identical to another Pokémon, Clefable. A Clefable is a gentle fairy, a being of light and moonbeams. Gengar is its inverted mirror, its negative image. The colours are swapped, the smile becomes a grin, and the light becomes shadow. For years, fans have whispered that Gengar is not a separate species at all. It is the ghost of a dead Clefable, or perhaps the shadow that Clefable casts, a dark entity born from the fairy's own light. The Pokédex itself fuels this theory. In several entries, Gengar is described as laughing at its opponent's terror, or creeping up on people to curse them. But one entry in Pokémon Sun states that it hides in shadows, waiting for an opportunity to steal the life force of its prey. That is not a predator in the way Drifloon is. That is a parasite, a shadow that feeds on the energy of the living. And if Gengar is truly the shadow of Clefable, then every Clefable carries a potential death sentence. Their very existence creates a dark twin, a parasitic presence that longs to replace them. Is Gengar the result of a Clefable that died and turned into a ghost? Or is it a separate entity that only manifests when a Clefable is near, like a symbiote that drains the life it mimics? The line between life and death becomes meaningless when the dead can walk beside the living. when the shadow can be more real than the substance. This is not just a theory about Gengar, it echoes through other Pokémon. The legendary beasts of Yoto, Raikou, Entei and Suicune, are confirmed to be the reincarnated souls of 3 Pokémon that perished in the Burn Tower fire. They were resurrected by Ho-Oh, given new forms and powers. So they are the same souls but different bodies. That is a transformation, not a parasitism. Yet it proves that in this world, death is not an end. It is a gateway to another form of existence. And if souls can be reborn as legendary beasts, why could they not return as shadows? Then we have Yamask, a Pokémon that carries a mask that is said to be the face it wore as a human. The Pokédex entry for Yamask in Pokémon Black states that it is a spirit that tries to lure children to the afterlife. Wait, no, that is Drifloon. The actual Yamask entry is more chilling. It remembers its life as a human, and it stares at its own mask, sometimes crying. That mask is its former face. Yamask is a ghost that was once a person, and it now wanders the world, seeking connection to a life it lost. This is not a parasite, but it is a relationship, a ghost and its own memory. The mask is a relic of a symbiotic bond between the soul and its former body, now broken. But the Gengar-Clefable connection is the most intimate. They share the same silhouette, the same proportions, the same posture. If you set them side by side, they are almost perfect opposites. One is pink, one is purple. One is a fairy type, the other a ghost type. One is said to bring happiness, the other to bring curses. The implication is that they are 2 halves of a whole, one living and one dead, one light and one shadow. And if they are connected, what keeps them apart? Is Clefable's light responsible for Gengar's existence, like a flame that casts a shadow? Or is Gengar a parasite that waits for a Clefable to weaken or die so it can claim its place? This is the shadow of a friend, the friend that is not a friend at all, but a reflection, a parasite, a ghost that cannot let go. The bond between Gengar and Clefable is not merely a cute mirror. It is a statement about the nature of existence in the Pokémon world. Nothing is purely alive or purely dead. Symbiosis and parasitism are not opposites. They are degrees of the same relationship, a give and take that sometimes ends in the taking of life itself. As we drift deeper into the night, the shadows grow longer, and one shadow in particular demands our full attention. It is the inverted soul of a fairy, the darkness that follows the light. Next, we will explore the hidden truth behind that pair, the story that has been whispered for decades, yet only now begins to reveal itself. That story is called Gengar and Clefable, the inverted soul, and when you see them side by side, you will never look at a friendly Pokémon the same way again. The last chapter left us standing in the dim light of the Pokémon world, looking closely at the shadows cast by creatures we thought we understood. We saw the birth of a theory, the shadow Pokémon theory, which suggests that the bonds between species are not always what they seem, that life and death are not so cleanly separated in this universe. Among the evidence brought to light, 2 figures stand as the ultimate proof of this concept. 2 Pokémon whose connection is so intimate, so perfectly mirrored, that it challenges everything we know about the origins of the creatures who share this world with us. Their names are Gengar and Clefable. At first glance, the idea that a ghost type and a fairy type could be linked in such a literal way seems absurd. Clefable is the embodiment of moonlight and kindness, a gentle creature believed to have descended from the moon itself. Gengar is a phantom of pure mischief and malice, a being of shadows that hides under floors and waits in empty rooms. But look at the numbers, look at the physical profiles. Clefable stands at 1.3 meters tall, perfectly rounded, 2 pointed ears, a wide and gentle smile. Gengar stands at 1.5 meters, a slight difference in height, but the silhouette is unmistakably the same. The round body, the pointed ears, the curve of that smile. If you were to take the outline of Clefable and stretch it upward just a little, fill that outline with pure black, you would have Gengar. The weight is almost identical. Clefable weighs 40.0 kilograms. Gengar weighs 40.5 kilograms. The structure is the same. The bones, if a ghost can be said to have bones, the form, the posture. It is as if one is the shadow cast by the other, anchored to the same physical reality, tethered by the same shape. This is where the original Pokédex entry becomes crucial. Gengar is not simply a ghost type. The original Pokédex does not classify it as the spirit Pokémon or the spectre Pokémon. It classifies Gengar specifically as the shadow Pokémon. That word shadow was a deliberate choice. A shadow is not a being in its own right. It is a projection. It is the negative space created when a solid object blocks the light. If Clefable is the object, the body that stands in the light, then Gengar is the darkness that follows wherever that body goes. The shadow is proof of the body's existence. It cannot exist without the original. But what happens when that shadow gains a mind of its own? What happens when the light goes out and the shadow remains? The theory takes a darker turn when you consider the inversion of their very essence. Clefable is pure, gentle, a bringer of good fortune. Gengar is mischievous, sometimes cruel, a lurker in the cold places. Clefable carries the fairy type in later generations, the embodiment of life and magical protection. Gengar is ghost and poison, a toxic spirit, a corruption of the living. But the most telling detail is the colour palette. Take the pink of Clefable, invert those colours on the digital spectrum. You do not get a random set of hues. You get Gengar's deep purple, its black body, the red of its eyes. It is a perfect negative, a photographic reversal of a living thing. This inverted relationship strongly suggests that Gengar is not just a counterpart or a rival, it is a consequence. The most widely accepted interpretation of this evidence is that Gengar is the ghost of a Clefable that died. When a Clefable passes away, its spirit does not simply move on to some distant afterlife. It twists. The nurturing lunar energy that once made it a gentle companion becomes corrupted into spectral poison. A kind smile becomes a wicked grin, a mockery of the shape it once wore. The body, now unanchored from life, sinks into the shadows, its own darkness becoming a new physical form. You can see it in the way they move in the games. Clefable dances, it floats, it seems buoyant, full of a light that lifts it. Gengar sinks. It oozes through cracks in reality. It drags itself along the floor. Gengar lurks in the cold basements of abandoned mansions, in the tombs of Pokémon Tower, in the caves where light never reaches. It searches in those dark places for something it recognizes, a reflection of its former self. It laughs because it remembers what it lost, and that memory drives it to prank and haunt those who still have their own light. The symmetry is undeniable. The science of the Pokémon world, the lore, the design philosophy, it all points to a single haunting conclusion. The shadow Pokémon is the ghost of the moonlight Pokémon. Every Gengar you meet carries the silent weight of a life that ended, a body that remained, a shape that refused to fade. The weight difference tells its own story. Why is Gengar heavier than a solid living creature of the same size? It suggests density, not of muscle or bone, but of intent, grief, malice. The weight of a soul denied its peace is physically measurable in this universe. Clefable is light, both in kilograms and in spirit. The ghost is dense, with the burden of its own unfinished existence. It sinks into the floor of the Pokémon Tower because the memories anchor it to that spot. It is heavy with regret. This connectedness, this physical record of loss, represents a deeply materialist view of the spirit world in Pokémon. It tells us that death leaves a measurable footprint, a change in the physics of the region. It extends beyond the individual creature. It bleeds into the geography of the world itself. In Saffron City, the laws of the physical world seem to break down entirely. Forced by a presence so powerful it rewrote the reality of the city. That story, The Haunting of Saffron City, takes this shadow theory and expands it to a city-wide scale, where the line between psychic energy and ghostly possession became a tangible threat. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. We left off with the image of Gengar, as the inverted shadow of Clefable, a silhouette reversed, a colour palette swapped, a creature defined by what it is not. The Pokédex calls Gengar the shadow Pokémon, and for decades, fans have traced the outline of that shadow back to a living, breathing, perhaps deceased Clefable. But if that theory holds weight, it forces a question that lingers in the air, like the chill of a ghost type's cry. Where do all these shadows gather? Why are some cities more haunted than others? And why, of all places, does Saffron City, the bustling heart of Kanto's commercial and psychic power, seem to attract spirits like a lantern draws moths? Saffron City sits at the crossroads of Kanto, a hub of human activity, trade and psychic energy. It is home to Sylph Co., the corporation that practically controls the Pokeball market, and it is the stage for one of the most peculiar rivalries in the entire region, the Fighting Dojo versus the Psychic Gym. On the surface, this is a tale of two gyms, one official and one unofficial, one led by Sabrina, the other by a martial arts master named Koichi. But dig deeper, and you find that between these two buildings, separated by only a few blocks, there is a corridor of unresolved tension, a spiritual fault line where the dead refuse to rest. The Fighting Dojo was once the true gym of Saffron City. Before Sabrina took control, before her psychic powers bent the city to her will, the dojo stood as a symbol of physical discipline, of raw human strength owned through years of training. Then Sabrina arrived. Her psychic abilities were not just powerful, they were terrifying. She could read minds, control movements, and, according to some accounts, she could literally disappear people into another dimension. The official gym badge was transferred to her, and the dojo was reduced to a side attraction, a place for trainers who couldn't cut it against her psychic might. But the dojo never truly surrendered. Its masters still train in secret, still prepare for the day they might reclaim their legacy. And in the meantime, the space between the two gyms has become a repository for something far older than any rivalry. Ghost-type Pokémon thrive in places where emotional energy runs high, where conflict leaves invisible scars. The psychic battles that once shattered the city's peace, the frustration of the dojo's defeat, the silent grief of trainers who lost their Pokémon to Sabrina's cruel laughter. All of that soaked into the concrete and the air. Over time, the density of human and Pokémon life in Saffron created a breeding ground for spirits. Think about it. Every time a trainer passes through, every time a Pokeball is thrown, every time a bond is formed or broken, a trace of that energy lingers. And ghost types, particularly Gengar, are drawn to those traces like iron filings to a magnet. But why Gengar specifically? Because Gengar is not just any ghost. Every Gengar you encounter, in the wild, in battles, in the haunted towers of Lavender Town, represents a loss. A Pokémon that once lived and breathed and trusted, now reduced to a cunning shadow. The Pokédex entries across generations hint at this. Gengar hides in the shadows of people and Pokémon alike, waiting for a moment of weakness, for a moment when the living forget to guard their hearts. And in Saffron City, the living are always present. The city never sleeps. Trainers crowd the streets, businessmen fill Sylph Co., and Pokémon of all types wander through the alleys. Where life is dense, death is never far behind. Gengar appears where the boundary between the two is thinnest. There is a specific Pokémon tower just outside Saffron, but even within the city limits, ghost types have been reported near the dojo at night. Trainers have told stories of a shadow that flickers between the dojo's training dummies. A cold laugh that echoes from the empty gym floor. Some say it is the spirit of a matchup that died in a sparring match, never given a proper burial. Others claim it is the residual anger of the dojo's former champions, refusing to accept their defeat. But the more you look, the more you see the pattern. Every Gengar, every ghost type in Saffron, is a reminder that the Pokémon world is built on countless small tragedies. The cute ball of gas that follows you through the cave might have once been a beloved partner. The shadow that grins in the corner of your vision might have been a friend, and that is the realization that settles like frost on the skin. The Fighting Dojo and the Psychic Gym are not just rival factions. They are symbols of a universe where conflict generates ghosts. Each Gengar in Saffron City, each one you've ever caught or battled, is a monument to a life that ended too soon. The shadow of Clefable is just one example. The entire species of Gengar is a species of loss. They exist because somewhere something died. So when you walk through Saffron City in the game, when you pass the dojo and the gym and the bustling streets, remember that the air is thick with the invisible. The spirits are not just in Lavender Town. They are in the heart of human civilization, because that is where the density of life and death is highest. And every time you send out a Gengar to battle, you are calling on the memory of something that was once alive. That idea leads directly to another story. A story about fire and rebirth, about the ashes of what was consumed and the new life that rises from it. Because if Gengar represents the lingering shadow of death, then there are other Pokémon that represent the opposite. A resurrection so powerful it reshapes the world. And the truth of that resurrection lies in a burned tower, a phoenix, and 3 beasts that were once nothing but sorrow. We left off in Saffron City, where the spirits of the dead cling to the spaces between human ambition and Pokémon nature. Gengar's presence there, lurking in the shadow of the Sylph Co. building, was no accident. The Fighting Dojo and the Psychic Gym represent a schism in the city's soul, but beneath that rivalry, something older breathes. Saffron is dense with life, and where life clusters, death follows. That is the law of the Pokémon world, one that becomes impossible to ignore once you cross the sea into Johto, because Johto holds a story that rewrites everything you thought you knew about the relationship between death and power. It is the story of fire. Fire that cleanses, fire that destroys, and fire that in the hands of a deity becomes the crucible of rebirth. We are moving into the Johto region's most famous legend, the Burned Tower, and it is here that the Pokémon world draws its clearest line between what we call an elemental spirit and what we must now call a resurrected being. For years, fans assumed that Raikou, Entei and Suicune were simply nature incarnate, lightning, fire, water given form, guardians of the land. They felt ancient, eternal, as if they had always existed in those roles. But the truth, confirmed in the remakes of Gold and Silver, is far more unsettling. They were not born, they were made. And what they were made from was death. Inside the Burned Tower, 3 Pokémon perished in a fire that consumed the building. The flames were not ordinary. They were infused with the power of a legendary Pokémon. The tower was a sacred place, a meeting point between the world of humans and the realm of the legendary beasts. When the fire broke out, it was not an accident, it was a test, and the 3 who died failed that test. But Ho-Oh, the great phoenix, the keeper of the rainbow wing, descended, and it brought them back. This is where the distinction between elemental spirits and resurrected beings becomes sharp. An elemental spirit is born from the forces of nature. It has no past, no memory of mortality. It simply is. But a resurrected being carries the scar of its own death. It knows what it means to cease to exist. And that knowledge changes everything. Raikou, Entei and Suicune are not spirits of lightning, fire and water. They are ghosts, wearing the bodies of elements. They are the survivors of a tragedy that was never meant to happen, and the price of that survival was paid by Ho-Oh itself. The role of Ho-Oh as a deity of life is not a simple one. In the narratives of the Pokémon world, resurrection is rarely free. Ho-Oh did not just wave a wing and restore the 3 to life. It imbued them with its own essence, making them extensions of its will. They became legendary, not because they were born that way, but because they were chosen. And that selection came with a cost. What was the cost? We can infer it from the silence. Ho-Oh disappeared for centuries after that event. It was not seen again until the events of Gold and Silver, and even then, only by those who proved themselves worthy. The legend says that Ho-Oh flew away from the burned tower and never looked back. But what if it was not flying away? What if it was hiding? What if the act of resurrection drained so much of its power that it needed generations to recover? There is a darker interpretation, that Ho-Oh broke a rule. It interfered with the natural cycle of death, and the price of that interference was that it could no longer remain in the world of humans without drawing the attention of forces it had angered. So it vanished, leaving behind only the rainbow wing as a promise that it would return when the time was right. The three resurrected beings became its guardians, but they were also its jailers. They wandered Johto not as free spirits, but as sentinels bound to a duty they never asked for. Their elemental powers are a gift and a curse. They are forever tied to the elements that killed them. Lightning, fire, water, the very forces that ended their first lives, now define their second. And here is where the theory deepens. Some fans have argued that the three Pokémon who died in the burned tower were not random. They were likely Eevee, or at least a Pokémon capable of evolving into three distinct forms. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Eevee is the only Pokémon with three evolutions that mirror the elements of the legendary beasts. Vaporeon corresponds to Suicune, Jolteon to Raikou, and Flareon to Entei. The timeline matches. The connection is too perfect to be coincidence. If true, then the burned tower is not just a story about resurrection. It is a story about evolution forced by trauma. The Eevee, or whatever they were, did not choose to become the beasts. They were forced into those forms by death. Their new bodies were not a reward. They were a necessity, a vessel to contain a soul that had been torn from its original body. That is the price of Ho-Oh's intervention. Life, yes, but a life that is no longer your own. We will never know the names of the three who died. The game does not tell us, but their voices echo in the howl of the wind through the burned tower's ruins. They are still there, beneath the legend, the ghosts of the original fire. And what of the tower itself? It was never rebuilt, not because the people of Johto could not, but because they would not. The tower became a shrine to the dead, a reminder that even in a world of Pokémon, some flames cannot be extinguished. Now the burned tower stands as a monument to the boundary between life and death, and the question it asks is simple. What would you become if you were given a second chance, knowing that the cost was your identity? That question lingers as we step closer to the fire. The story of the three who perished in the burned tower is one of the most haunting in Pokémon history, because it is so specific. We know the tower, we know the fire, we know the resurrection, but we do not know the victims. They remain faceless, unnamed, reduced to the elements that now define them, and soon we will meet them again, not as nameless souls, but as legends. But before we do, we must ask what they lost in the flames. Not just their lives, but their humanity, if they had any. Because the truth is that every resurrected being in the Pokémon world carries the weight of its former self, and that weight is what makes them so terrifyingly real. In our next chapter, we will walk into that fire. We will look at the three who perished, not as legendary beasts, but as victims, and we will ask what it means to be reborn when death is the only memory you have left. That chapter is called The Three Who Perished in the Burned Tower, and it will change how you see the pillars of Johto forever. The burned tower in Ecruteak City holds a secret that was only fully revealed in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. 3 unnamed Pokémon perished in that fire, and their deaths were not the end. They were only the beginning. For years, players walked through its ruins, felt the chill of its history, but never fully understood the tragedy written in its walls. Until the remakes, the truth was buried. Now we know that the tower was struck by lightning, causing a fire that raged through the wooden halls. In the chaos, 3 Pokémon were trapped. They didn't die in battle. They died in terror, in flame, in the collapse of their home. This was no epic war, no glorious sacrifice. It was a simple, brutal accident. But Ho-Oh, the Phoenix of Legend, took pity on them. From their ashes, it crafted new bodies, and so were born Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. The question that has haunted fans for decades is this: what were those 3 Pokémon before they became legends? The most persistent theory suggests they were Eevee. Eevee, the evolution Pokémon, capable of adapting to any environment. It is said that in ancient times, 3 Eevee were brought to the tower, and each evolved into a different form. Jolteon, Flareon, Vaporeon. But in the fire, they were not just killed, they were unmade, and then remade by Ho-Oh into something new. The evidence is compelling. Look at the designs. Raicha's thunderous mane echoes Jolteon's spiky fur. Entei's fiery visage mirrors Flareon's flame. Suicune's auroral grace reflects Vaporeon's watery nature. The types align: electric, fire, water. The weight and height of the beasts are roughly proportional to the evolutions. Even the colour schemes suggest a connection. The theory posits that before the fire, these 3 were not just any Pokémon, but specific evolutions: Jolteon, Flareon and Vaporeon, Pokémon that had already been chosen for their elemental affinity. But the fire did not discriminate. It consumed them, and in their death, Ho-Oh saw potential for something greater. Imagine the scene: a night of storm, a bolt of lightning, and the tower engulfed in flames. The 3 Pokémon, whether Eevee or their evolved forms, were inside. They couldn't escape. The heat, the smoke, the terror. It was a cruel end. But in Pokémon lore, death is often a catalyst for transformation. Their spirits, heavy with sorrow and shock, were caught by Ho-Oh's gaze. And in that moment, they were reborn, not as the same creatures, but as living legends. The Heart Gold and Soul Silver games explicitly confirm that the legendary beasts were once ordinary Pokémon that died in the burned tower fire. This isn't speculation, it's canon. The game's story, through its historians and storytellers, reveals the truth. The fan theory that they were evolutions remains unconfirmed in official lore, but the parallels are too strong to ignore. The connections between the beast types and the classic Eevee evolutions, the presence of Eevee in the Johto region, and the elemental symmetry all point to a deliberate design choice. But Ho-Oh's role in this story is far from over. The Phoenix did not just create 3 beasts. It set into motion a cycle of death and rebirth that touches the very heart of Pokémon mythology. The tower's ashes hold secrets that even the legends cannot suppress. In the next chapter, we delve into the divine mechanics of that resurrection and how Ho-Oh's fire might have changed more than we ever knew. The story of Ho-Oh's divine intervention is one that rewrites everything we thought we understood about Pokémon Resurrection. But that's a tale for another night. The last chapter left us standing at the base of the burned tower, staring up at the charred beams where 3 nameless Pokémon perished. We trace the theory that they might have been an Eevee and its evolved forms: Jolteon, Flareon, Vaporeon. But that is speculation built on silhouette and type. What we know for certain, carved into the lore of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, is that they died, and then they came back. Resurrection is a rare, almost unheard of event in the Pokémon world. Death here is usually permanent. Ghosts exist, lingering souls that haunt towers and caves, but they remain ghosts. They do not return as living, breathing creatures with fur and lightning and fire. The only being capable of such a miracle is Ho-Oh, the Rainbow Phoenix, whose wings paint the sky at dawn. When Ho descended upon the burned tower after the fire, it did not simply mourn the 3 fallen creatures. It breathed new life into their ashes, reshaping them into something entirely different. The beasts that rose from that inferno, Raikou, Entei, Suicune, were no longer the same souls that had died. They were transformed, reborn, but not healed. And that is where the fear begins. The people of Ecruteak City do not worship the legendary beasts. They do not build shrines to them or leave offerings. Instead, they lock their doors at night and tell their children to come inside before dusk. The story of the burned tower is not a tale of salvation. It is a warning. Because those 3 beings did not come back grateful, they came back scarred. Their resurrection was a forced, violent rebirth, and trauma like that leaves marks that no amount of divine light can erase. Raikou carries the storm's anger, its mane crackling with the fury of a creature that woke up to find its old body gone. Entei roars with the heat of the fire that killed it, now turned outward as a weapon. Suicune weeps through the rain, forever searching for something it cannot name, because the memory of what it was is buried under layers of ash. To the townsfolk, the beasts are not protectors. They are reminders of what happens when death is undone. In a world where death is the final natural end, resurrection is an aberration. It disrupts the order, introduces a wild card that cannot be trusted. The beasts roam Yoto without purpose, bound to no master, driven only by the pain of their past lives. That is why Ekritique keeps its distance. That is why the legends speak of them as destroyers, as often as they speak of them as saviors. Consider the weight of that resurrection. Ho-Oh acted out of compassion, or perhaps out of a sense of duty. But compassion does not guarantee comfort. The beasts were given life again, but they were not given peace. Their past lives, whatever they were, ended in terror and flame. They woke up trapped inside new forms that felt alien, with powers they could not control. Every bolt of lightning that Raikou summons is a scream. Every flame that Entei breathes is a sob. Every wave that Suicune calls forth is a tear. They are the living symbols of the trauma they endured. Walking monuments to a tragedy that will never be forgotten, because the victims themselves cannot forget it. And so, when a traveller approaches Ekritique from the west, they hear the stories long before they see the city. The elders say that Raikou once tore through a farmstead in a thunderstorm, levelling every building with a single roar. They say Entei appeared during a drought and burned the crops to the ground, then vanished into the smoke. They say Suicune purifies water, but only if it chooses to, and if it doesn't, it leaves the rivers bitter and cold. These are not myths meant to inspire. They are warnings, passed down through generations, etched into the city's collective memory. The fear is not irrational. The beasts are not evil, but they are wounded, and wounded things lash out. The people of Ekritique understand that better than anyone. They live in the shadow of the burned tower, a constant reminder that death can be undone, but at a terrible cost. Resurrection does not erase the past. It carries it forward, twisted and heavy, until the weight crushes everything it touches. That weight is what makes the legendary beasts so tragic. They are not villains. They are victims of a miracle they never asked for. And the next time you hear the rumble of thunder or see a pillar of smoke on the horizon, remember, it is not a god descending. It is a creature still trying to outrun a fire that went out centuries ago. But there is another story hidden in the ashes of that tower, a story about the one who was left behind, the small creature that survived the fire only to lose everything it loved. That story will lead us into a place far darker than any burning building, a place where grief turns hollow and a child's skull becomes a helmet. We will follow that path in the next chapter as we descend into the Orphan's Lament. The story of Ho-Oh and the burned tower is a story about life emerging from the ashes of death, a cosmic second chance gifted to the worthy. But not every tragedy in this world is met with a rainbow-feathered resurrection. Some stories remain grounded in the cold permanence of loss. Some souls are not reborn in fire. They are simply left behind. And the most heartbreaking of them all does not belong to a legendary beast, but to a small, lonely ground type that cries beneath the light of the moon. There is a theory, perhaps the most famous sad theory in all of Pokémon history, that hinges entirely on a single prop, a bone and a skull. The theory is so well known, it has almost become canon through sheer force of emotional consensus. Cubone wears the skull of its deceased mother. The Pokédex tells us this directly. It says the skull serves as a helmet, that the Cubone never removes it, that it wails at the moon, mourning a loss it can never fully understand or escape. It is an orphan in the most literal sense, carrying its grief physically upon its head. But pause for a moment and deconstruct that entry. Look at the biological mechanics. A Cubone hatches from an egg. If a Cubone is born and is immediately pictured or described with its mother's skull, that skull must be inherited, passed down from the parent. If the mother is a standard Marowak, her skull is dramatically different in shape and proportion. The skull on Cubone's head is rounded, compact, almost perfectly fitted to its own infant form. It does not look like it was taken from a fully grown Marowak. It looks like it belongs to a being of a similar silhouette. This dissonance has fueled decades of speculation. What exactly is Cubone wearing? Is the evolution line missing a step? Is the story we are told the full story? Or is it a myth layered over a much stranger and darker biological reality? The games themselves, however, provided the emotional confirmation that the deeper tragedy needed, even if they left the biological riddle unanswered. In the original Pokémon Red and Blue, players descend into the depths of Lavender Town Tower. They are stopped not by a hostile trainer or a wild Pokémon, but by a ghost, an invisible, untouchable spirit that blocks the stairs with a sorrow that cannot be passed. This spirit is eventually revealed through the Sylph scope to be the ghost of a Marowak. The narrative unfolds through the memories of Mr. Fuji and the other lingering souls. This Marowak was the mother of a Cubone. She was killed by Team Rocket in their greed for profit and territory. She did not move on. Her spirit remained trapped in the tower, not out of anger toward the player, but out of a mother's instinct to protect the child she was forced to leave behind. Here is the confirmation that moves the Cubone theory from a melancholic detail in a Pokédex entry into a concrete, heartbreaking event that the player must actively resolve. The music of Lavender Town is famous for its unsettling tone, a slow, descending dirge that feels wrong for a children's game. But when you understand the context of what is happening in that tower, the music becomes a requiem. It is a funeral march for a mother who never got to see her child grow up, and for the child, waiting somewhere out in the world, unknowingly wearing the only piece of her that remains. The story of Cubone is the story of what happens when the resurrection promised by Ho-Oh does not come. It is the tale of the aftermath, the reality that for every legendary beast reborn in sacred flame, there are 1,000 ordinary souls left to haunt the cold places of the world, their memories locked in bone and fossil. This, then, is the Orphan's Lament, a cry into the void that the Pokémon world acknowledges, but does not easily heal. We are left with a question that has haunted the fandom for decades. If Marowak is the mother, and the skull belongs to the mother, why does it fit the child so perfectly? What if the true origin of this tragedy, even stranger, even more deeply woven into the fabric of the game's cut content than a simple case of a mother and child? How deep does the missing link between Cubone and another entirely different Pokémon go? There is a glitch, a scrapped evolution, a skeleton in the code that suggests the story we know is only half the truth. That is the subject of Chapter 17, Cubone and the missing link to Kangaskhan. But for now, let the sound of that single wail echoing off the walls of Lavender Tower settle over you, a reminder that even in a world of monsters and magic, some wounds never fully close. The story of Cubone is one that rests heavily on a single piece of bitter knowledge. The skull it wears is not some decorative shell or discarded relic from another creature. It is the only remaining piece of its mother. We established last chapter the biological and emotional horror of that origin, a child carrying the literal skull of its parent. But what if the full story was even more complex than a simple tragedy? What if the code of the original games held a secret that completely recontextualizes the Orphan's entire existence? Deep in the hexadecimal guts of Pokémon Red and Blue, there exists a glitch, a phantom in the machine known as the M-glitch. It is a strange artifact of leftover data, a doorway into the game's abandoned intentions. For years, players stumbled into this glitch by accident, accessing hidden menus or manifesting impossible creatures. But under the surface of this chaotic coding lies a specific, chilling piece of evidence: the scrapped evolution of Marowak into Kangaskhan. This is not just a rumour, it is a confirmed piece of cut content. Within the game's data, there is a fully programmed evolution sequence connecting the ground-type Marowak to the normal-type Kangaskhan. The link was severed before release, but the ghosts of it remain in the code, accessible only through the irregular pathways of the Emma glitch. Consider the implications of this intended evolution. Marowak is the evolved form of Cubone, the orphan child. If Cubone evolves into a Marowak, and Marowak was supposed to evolve into Kangaskhan. We are looking at a complete life cycle, a cycle of tragedy and rebirth. The mother, a Marowak, dies. The child, Cubone, survives by wearing her skull. It grows strong, evolves into Marowak itself, and then transcends into Kangaskhan, the parent protector. A new mother, a new beginning. The visual evidence supports this beautifully. Look at Kangaskhan, the parent Pokémon. It carries a child in its pouch. That child, in the original sprites and concept art, closely resembles a baby Kangaskhan, but its features are not entirely dissimilar from a young Cubone. The protective stance of Kangaskhan completes the exact same arc that Marowak started. It becomes the thing it lost. But the developers made a choice. They removed this evolution. They cut the link. The removal of this evolutionary chain did not just delete a gameplay mechanic. It fundamentally trapped Cubone's story in a state of permanent grief. By cutting the evolution, the cycle of protection and rebirth was broken. Cubone has a dead mother. That mother is a Marowak. It can evolve into Marowak, but it can never become the parent. It can never close the circle. It is forever the orphan, wearing the relic of a past it can never return to. Think about the Pokédex entries across the generations. They uniformly refer to the ghost of Cubone's mother haunting the Pokémon Tower. In Lavender Town, the spirit of a Marowak mourning its lost child. If the evolution was still intact, this would be a different story. The Marowak would be a transitional state, a being of memory on its way to becoming something new. Instead, it is the final tragic form of a deceased parent, and Cubone is left with no escape from its grief. So when players stumbled into the M glitch and discovered this lost evolution, they weren't just finding a game-breaking bug. They were uncovering a hidden narrative, a secret happy ending that was deliberately scrubbed from the world of Pokémon. The code told the truth that the final game dared not show, a world where the orphan could heal, where the skull could be removed, where the cycle of death could be broken by transformation. The fact that this was removed makes Cubone's journey significantly darker. It is a story of a missing link, not a missing link in the evolutionary chain of a fictional species, but a missing link in the grieving process itself. Cubone cannot get better. The code that would allow it to heal was redacted. It is a survival story with the second half ripped out. This brings us inevitably back to Lavender Town, back to the Tower of Departed Souls. The Marowak ghost that blocks your path is not just a random encounter. It is the direct, tragic consequence of this severed link. It is the mother who can never evolve, the spirit left behind because the path forward was erased. And this is exactly where we will venture next, because the ghost of the mother is just the beginning. The tower itself is a monument to this pain, and the truth buried within it shakes the very foundation of what we think we know about death in the Pokémon world. The name of that truth is Chapter 18, The Ghost of Lavender Tower. The tower is waiting, and its spirits have a story that is far older and far more personal than any game manual ever recorded. The last chapter left us staring at a glitch in the code, a broken evolution chain that pointed towards something deeply sad. The evidence buried in Pokémon Red and Blue suggested that Kangaskhan was meant to be the final, living form of a survivor, a Cubone that somehow outlived its mother, grew strong, and shed the skull to become something new. But that evolution was never finished. Instead, the story took a different turn. The mother did not simply vanish, she stayed. You knew, the moment you first stepped into the Lavender Tower, that something was wrong. The music alone was enough, a slow, mournful melody that wrapped around you like fog. The building itself felt old, in a way that had nothing to do with bricks and mortar. Every floor was a climb into heavier silence. Wild Pokémon appeared, but they were ghosts, ghastly, haunter, the occasional ghastly that seemed to flicker at the edges of your vision. And on the third floor, you met something that stopped you cold, a ghost, a literal, untouchable spirit blocking the staircase. The game gave you no way past it. You could talk to it, and it would moan. You could try to run, but it lingered in your memory. This was not a puzzle to be solved by brute force. This was a wound that had to be healed. The Sylph scope was the key, and its name was a clue. This was not a toy. It was a device designed to reveal the truth, to strip away illusion and show you what was really there. When you finally brought the scope to Lavender Tower, aimed it at the ghost, the screen changed. The shimmering white form became solid, a Marowak, not a wild Pokémon, not a random encounter, a specific one, a mother. And then the battle began. That moment, for anyone who played through the original games, was the first time the game made death feel real. Every other fight was a challenge. This one was a tragedy. You were fighting the ghost of a Pokémon who had been killed, not by another Pokémon, not by accident, by human hands, by Team Rocket, the same organization you had been chasing through the game, dismantling their operations, thinking they were just criminals with bad attitudes. But here was the proof of what they truly were. They had murdered a Pokémon to drive off its child. They had taken a life because it was inconvenient, and the ghost had not moved on. It remained, trapped in the tower, bound by rage and grief. Its attack pattern was no different from any other wild Pokémon, but the context changed everything. Every scratch, every growl carried the weight of loss. When you defeated it, because you had to, there was no way around the battle. The spirit did not simply faint, it vanished, and in its place only silence remained, and the knowledge that a mother had died to protect her child. And that child was now alone in the world, wearing a skull as a helmet, crying in the night. This was the narrative climax of the original games. Not the final battle against your rival, not the capture of Mewtwo, but the moment you had to face what cruelty can leave behind. Team Rocket's greed was not abstract. It had a victim, a spirit that could not rest until someone bore witness to its suffering, and the game made sure you understood that you were that witness. After the battle, the ghost was freed. It could finally leave, but you were left with the pieces. The tower became quiet. The music didn't fully lift, even after you reached the top and calmed Mr. Fuji, because the stain of what had happened here could not be washed away by a simple victory. This single event changed the tone of the franchise forever. Before Lavender Tower, Pokémon was a world of adventure. After it, the world had shadows. The franchise admitted that death was real, that loss was permanent, and that not every story had a happy ending for every character. The Cubone you might catch later was not just a cute ground type. It was an orphan. Its Pokédex entry, the one that says it wears the skull of its deceased mother, stopped being a quirky fact and became a scar. The game had confirmed the darkest theory about Cubone's origin, not by telling you outright, but by showing you the mother's ghost and the conspiracy that grew from that. The idea that Team Rocket's cruelty deliberately created a vengeful spirit was not a theory at all. It was canon. You saw it with your own eyes. You fought it with your own Pokémon. Now, years later, later games would expand on that idea. They would show us that ghosts are not just monsters to catch. They are the remnants of lives ended too soon. And in Generation 5, a new Pokémon appeared that would take this concept to its most literal extreme. Yamask, a ghost that carries a mask, its own face from when it was human. That quiet, terrifying truth leads us to a question that the franchise has never fully answered, but has never stopped hinting at. What happens when the boundary between humans and Pokémon becomes thin enough to cross? What if some of the creatures we battle were once people? We'll follow that thread in the next chapter. When we talk about when humans become Pokémon, we left our story in the crumbling tower of Lavender Town, standing before the ghost of a Marowak who was murdered by Team Rocket. That spirit was not a random collection of data. It was a specific being, a mother ripped from her child, and it proved something terrifying. In the Pokémon world, death is not a wall, it is a door, and what walks through that door does not always stay dead. Sometimes, it comes back wearing the skin of a monster. Tonight, we are exploring the single most disturbing implication of the Pokémon universe, the terrifying transition from human life to Pokémon existence. We have seen ghosts, We have seen resurrections. But what happens when the echoes of the human soul are reborn into a creature with claws and a Pokédex number? The Pokédex, our supposed encyclopedia of harmless creatures, hides a terrifying pattern. It quietly suggests that reincarnation is not a rare miracle, but a common occurrence. Look at the burned tower in Yoto. We already broke down how 3 nameless Pokémon perished in the flames of a lightning strike. They were not reborn as angels. They were reborn as Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. This is our first canon proof of death, leading to a second life as a Pokémon. But the beasts are not the rule. They are the exception to a quiet, horrifying rule. The truly dark evidence lies with the ordinary Pokémon you can catch in the tall grass, the ones whose dex entries read like coroner's reports. Take Phantump. The entry says, "These Pokémon are stumps possessed by the spirits of children who died in the forest. Their cries sound like eerie screams. These are not wild animals. They are the sad remnants of lost children." Every time you encounter a Phantump, you are stepping over the grave of a child whose soul could not pass on. The Pokédex isn't describing a species. It is describing a graveyard. What is more tragic than death? Losing yourself, forgetting who you were. The Pokémon world suggests that many of its inhabitants are trapped in this exact state. They retain the fuzzy, painful memories of being human. They look at their own reflection and recognize a stranger. They hold objects that are relics of a life they can no longer touch. The Pokédex records beings that weep because they remember. They remember holding a child. They remember the warmth of their own skin. But now their face is a mask they carry. Their body is made of spectral rock or ectoplasmic gas. The terrifying transition from human life to Pokémon existence is not a gradual process in the lore. It is an abrupt, traumatic shattering. One moment you are alive. The next, you are a creature in the underbrush of a forest path. You try to speak, but only a digital cry comes out. A trainer finds you. They throw a ball. Your identity is stripped away and replaced with moves and stats. The core of who you were is now an accessory in a trainer's arsenal. This is the existential horror that sits silently at the core of Pokémon lore. The human mind, shattered and reformed into a monster. This is not a simple ghost story. This is a systematic cycle. The world of Pokémon consumes human souls and reprocesses them into wildlife. It is a mechanism of cosmic recycling, and the Pokédex is the inventory list. The species that embodies this entire terrifying concept more than any other is the one we must examine next. It is a creature that carries the physical evidence of its humanity in its hands, a being whose existence is a perpetual, weeping monument to what was lost. In the next chapter, we will face Yamask, the face of the deceased. This is the Pokémon that holds the key to understanding the dark cycle of reincarnation that plagues this universe. It is the undeniable proof we have been looking for, and it will change how you see every single Pokémon you have ever loved. The last chapter left us with a deeply unsettling question about the nature of reality in the Pokémon world. We looked at the evidence scattered across generations, the diaries, the journals, the abandoned theories, all pointing toward a single terrifying conclusion. The line between human and Pokémon is thinner than the games ever explicitly admit. It is not just a theory, it is a recurring, documented phenomenon. The spirits of the dead do not simply vanish into an ether. They linger, they twist, they find new forms. And perhaps no single evolution line embodies this horrific transition more completely, more personally, than a Pokémon introduced in the 5th generation games Black and White. This is the one that removes all doubt. This is the one where the games look directly at the player and confirm the darkest part of the conspiracy. Yamask carries a mask, but it is not a mask in the way a costume piece is a mask. It is a face, a human face. Specifically, face that belonged to the human being this Pokémon used to be. The Black and White Pokédex entry strips away any ambiguity. It states, and I quote, "Each of them carries a mask that used to be its face when it was human." The wording is surgical. It does not say a mask that resembles a human face. It does not say a mask carved in the likeness of a human. It says used to be its face. This is not a haunting. This is a documented case of post-mortem transformation. The very essence of the person, their identity, their soul, has been folded and compressed into a small ghostly body, and the only remnant of their former life that they can physically hold on to is the skin of their own visage. Consider the implications of this for a moment. Every Yamask you encounter in the Relic Castle, or wherever they drift in the Unova region, was once someone, a farmer, a merchant, a child. They woke up dead one day, and when they looked at their own reflection, they saw not a human face, but a mask clutched in spectral hands. The Pokédex entry from Pokémon Black does not stop at the fact of the mask. It digs deeper into the tragedy. It says they mourn their past lives. If you see one crying, it will be staring at its mask. Imagine that moment of recognition, the fog of death lifting just enough for this reincarnated spirit to look down at what it carries. It sees a face it knows, a nose, eyes, a smile it once wore in photographs, a brow that furrowed in frustration over bills or over schoolwork. It sees itself and it weeps. It weeps because it remembers. It remembers the warmth of the sun, the taste of bread, the sound of a laugh. It remembers being alive. And now it is a ghost Pokémon, wandering the dunes, clutching the proof of its own mortality. The mask is not a trophy. It is a tombstone. The horror here is not in the jump scare. It is in the sustained, quiet dread of identity loss. The Pokémon franchise has always hinted at this. The ghost of Marowak in Lavender Town had an unfinished business, a maternal rage that kept it tethered. But Yamask implies a broader crisis. It implies that the process is random, impersonal, and cruel. You do not simply pass on. You become a creature that is forced to look at your own death every single day. The mask is a mirror that reflects only the past, and when Yamask evolves into Cofagrigus, the mask is replaced entirely. The human face is abandoned, locked inside a sarcophagus. The person is finally truly gone. The Pokémon remains. The games handed us the key to understanding the entire cycle of death and reincarnation with this one creature, and most players walked right past it, dismissing it as just another spooky Pokédex entry. But it is a confession. It is the developers confirming that the ghosts you capture are not just data, they are souls. And if Yamask is the proof that humans become Pokémon, then what does it mean for a creature that was never a person at all, but an innocent? What about the spirits of children who got lost in the woods, never to find their way home? The story deepens. It twists further into the dark, because the next evolution chain in this lineage of sorrow does not carry a mask of its former face. It does not need to. The face is still recognizable, and the sound it makes is not a mournful cry. It is the sound of a child, alone in the dark, waiting for someone to find them. That story is for the next chapter. Phantump and the lost children of the woods. Yamask carries its face because it remembers. It remembers the warmth of life, the touch of air on skin, the sound of its own name. It clings to that identity, holding it up like a shield against the darkness of its new existence. But what happens to a spirit that never fully formed an identity? What happens to the soul of a child who never learned the shape of its own face? For that answer, we have to walk deeper into the woods, far from the ancient tombs of Unova, into the damp, moss-choked forests of Kalos and Hoenn. Here the ghost type takes on a different form, one that isn't carrying a mask, one that is the mask of the forest itself. The Pokémon is Phantump. At first glance, it looks like a creature born from a fairy tale, a tiny green stump with glowing orange eyes, and a tuft of leaves that quiver in the breeze. It almost looks playful, but the Pokédex does not leave room for interpretation. It states, and I am quoting directly from the games here, "These Pokémon are created when spirits possess rotten tree stumps. The spirits of children who got lost in the forest possess tree stumps, becoming Phantump." This is not a wild ghost that looks like a stump. It is a stump that has been animated by the soul of a child who died in the woods, a child who never found their way home. This confirmation changes the geography of the Pokémon world. Every forest route, every shaded grove, every patch of wild grass becomes a potential resting place for a lost soul. The Pokédex entries across multiple generations hammer this point home with relentless consistency. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the text reads, "According to old tales, these Pokémon are stumps possessed by the spirits of children who died while lost in the forest." In Sun and Moon, the phrasing shifts slightly, but the meaning stays the same. It's said that the spirits of children who get lost in the forest possess tree stumps, becoming Phantump. The implication is that Phantump is not a single species with a single origin story. It is a category, a fate. Any child who wanders into the deep woods and never returns runs the risk of becoming one of these creatures. The forest is not just a habitat for ghost types. The forest is the mechanism that creates them. Think about the mechanics of this tragedy. A child wanders into the forest. The canopy closes overhead. The light changes. The path disappears. They get turned around. The sun sets. The temperature drops. The familiar sounds of the daytime forest are replaced by the creaking of branches and the rustling of unseen things. Panic sets in. The child calls out for help. Their voice echoes through the trees, but no one answers. No one comes. Eventually, the forest takes them. The elements, the exposure, the simple, terrible fact of being lost until there is no energy left to call out. And when the life leaves their body, their spirit does not depart. It cannot find its way out. It looks for shelter. It finds the nearest hollow vessel, a rotten stump, or a fallen log, and it seeps inside. The child becomes the stump. The spirit becomes the wood, the roots, the leaves. It is frozen in that moment of panic and loneliness, trapped in a body that cannot run, cannot scream, cannot go home. But the tragedy does not end there. The Pokédex in Pokémon Sun adds a detail that transforms this story from a sad anecdote into something far more sinister. By imitating a child's voice, it causes people to get hopelessly lost deep in the forest. The thing that Phantump does, instinctively or perhaps maliciously, is lure others. It mimics the exact sound of a crying child, the very sound it once made. This is the cycle of tragedy in the forest. A person walks into the woods. They hear a child crying. It sounds desperate. It sounds real. They are a good person. They follow the voice to help, but the voice is coming from a stump that cannot move but can scream. The person wanders deeper, chasing the sound. The sun goes down. The voice stops. And now the person is lost. Their panic becomes the new echo in the trees. And when they too succumb, their spirit finds its own stump. The cycle continues. The lost children become the very things that lure others in. This is not a species of predator hunting for food. This is a contagion of sorrow. Every Phantump was once a victim, and every victim becomes a hunter. The forest becomes a closed loop of suffering. The children become the guardians of their own grave, crying out not to warn travelers, but to bring them company. The evolution to Trevenant makes this even more disturbing. Trevenant is no longer a stump, it is an entire tree. The Pokédex says it can control trees at will. It traps people who harm the forest so they can never leave. The implication is that the child's spirit has grown. It has expanded. It has merged with the forest itself. The lost child no longer remembers its name, its face, or its parents. It only remembers the feeling of being lost, and it spreads that feeling to everyone who enters its domain. The root-like hands that grab at you are the fingers of a child who never got to grow up. This is the grim origin of the forest-dwelling ghost Pokémon. It is not a creature of malice born from darkness. It is a creature of tragedy born from loneliness. The spirit of a child lost in the woods. The child becomes the stump becomes a Pokémon, and that Pokémon lures others to the same fate. The cycle of tragedy in the forest is perfectly closed. The lost children become the very things that lure others in. But the horror of Phantump is that it lacks the self-awareness of Yamask. Yamask knows it was human. Yamask holds its face and weeps for its former life. Phantump does not seem to have that same clarity. It is acting on instinct, a child lost in the dark, crying out for its parents, not understanding that the sound of its own voice is a death sentence for anyone who hears it. The younger the spirit, the more purely tragic the cycle becomes. So far, we have covered spirits that rise from death. Cubone's mother, Yamask, Phantump. They all require a tragic ending to a human life to begin their existence as a Pokémon. But what if the transformation did not require death? What if the erasure could happen to a living, breathing child who was simply too powerful? What if a young boy with immense psychic abilities was not trained, but destroyed, his consciousness overwritten by a Pokémon? That brings us to one of the most disturbing urban legends that the games directly confirmed, the story of the boy who became Kadabra. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. We've just come from the forests, where the spirits of lost children take root in rotting wood, becoming Phantump. But what if the transformation from human to Pokémon wasn't something that happened after death, but while you were still alive, still breathing, still you? What if you went to sleep as a boy and woke up as something else entirely? That's not a ghost story, that's a Pokédex entry. In Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green, the entry for Kadabra reads, "It is said to be a boy with psychic powers who woke up one morning as a Kadabra." No ambiguity, no metaphorical interpretation. A living human child with his own name and his own family went to bed one night and became a Pokémon. And this wasn't a glitch or a mistranslation. Multiple generations of the Pokédex have repeated the same story, sometimes with slight variations, but always the core horror remains. Somewhere in the Pokémon world, there is a boy who used to be a boy, and now he is a creature you can catch in a ball. The theory, often called the Boy to Kadabra theory, has haunted fans for decades. You'll remember the anime episode that was banned, the one featuring Sabrina and her Kadabra, where a human child is trapped in a mirror world and turned into a psychic puppet. But the game lore is even more direct. If you look at the Japanese version of the Gold and Silver Pokédex, it says that Kadabra was a boy who suddenly became a Pokémon after slipping into a deep sleep. Not a spirit, not a reincarnation, a transformation, a metamorphosis in the physical sense, almost like a forced evolution. And this raises a question that the games never dare ask, but that the Pokédex forces upon us. If you catch that Kadabra, if you make it battle for you, if you evolve it into Alakazam, are you enslaving a former human being? The ethics of capturing and commanding a Pokémon that used to have a soul you could talk to, a family you could visit, are chilling when you stop to think about it. Trainers are celebrated for their bonds with their Pokémon. But what kind of bond can you forge with a creature that remembers ordering a pizza last week, or hugging its mother, or crying? The Kadabra doesn't speak, but its Pokédex hints at an IQ of over 5,000. It understands everything, including its own lost humanity. Nowhere in the games is there a cure for this condition. The boy is trapped. If you encounter a wild Kadabra in the wild, are you looking at a former child who has been living in a cave for years, possibly decades? No one rescues him. He is a Pokémon now, and that means he is subject to the same rules as every other species. Catch, battle, trade, box. The story of the psychic boy who woke up as a Kadabra is not unique. There's evidence in other entries, other Pokémon, that suggest human to Pokémon transformation is more common than we like to admit. But Kadabra is the clearest proof, the one that stares back at you from the screen, with those closed eyes and that cryptic symbol on its forehead. It knows, and it cannot tell you. But if you think that's disturbing, wait until we examine a Pokémon whose very body is no longer its own. A creature that has been taken over entirely by a fungal parasite, its original mind erased, its movements controlled by a mushroom growing out of its own back. That story is for our next chapter, Parasect, the fungal puppet. Chapter 22 ended with the story of a boy who woke up as a Kadabra, a human consciousness trapped inside a Pokémon body. The horror was in the imprisonment, the confusion, the loss of everything familiar, the inability to go back. But what if the horror wasn't a mind trapped, but a mind erased? What if the body continues walking, breathing, fighting, and obeying commands, while the consciousness living inside it is quietly replaced, cell by cell, until nothing of the original owner remains? Not a soul, not a memory, not a spark of identity, just a shell that moves. This is the story of Parasect, and it is a story that does not just happen to a Pokémon in a vacuum. It happens to you as a trainer over the course of an evolution, a beautiful, terrifying, irreversible transformation you actively participate in. Pokémon lore sometimes hints at disturbing origins. Ghost types carry echoes of human tragedy. Psychic types hold mysteries of the mind. But Parasect is one of the rare examples where the text simply states the biological facts, and the facts are a nightmare dressed in natural design. Look at Paras first. It's pre-evolution. A small, docile bug and grass type found in caves and forests. It has bright red eyes, curious eyes. It scuttles around at your feet. There is a small mushroom growing on its back, and the two share a space. You might assume it is a symbiotic relationship, two creatures working together, a host and a passenger. The Pokédex in Pokémon Y suggests as much. It says the mushroom on its back drains the bug's life force, but in return, the mushroom releases spores to help the bug fight off attackers. This is Paras. The host is still alive here. There is a partnership, a balance, then it evolves, and the mask drops. The Pokédex in Pokémon Black describes Parasect with a chilling bluntness. It is a parasitic mushroom that is in control of the host. The host is dead. It is the mushroom that gives it life. This is the core realization, the biological horror of the mushroom Pokémon. You are not evolving your Paras into a stronger form. You are watching it die. You are holding the Pokeball of a corpse that moves, breathes, and fights for you. The real-world inspiration is the Ophiocordyceps fungus, the zombie ant fungus. It infects an insect, hijacks its central nervous system, and controls its muscles. It forces the host to climb to a precise height and location where the conditions are perfect for the fungus to reproduce. Then it kills the host, and a stalk sprouts from the head of the dead insect. The body becomes a vessel. This is precisely what the Pokédex confirms happens to Paras. The mushroom on its back grows. It reaches the brain. It takes over the motor functions. The insect stops being the insect. But Parasect is not just a mindless zombie. It is a puppet. And unlike the real-world fungus, which simply anchors the host in place, Parasect continues to walk. It continues to fight. It obeys its trainer perfectly. It uses moves like Spore, Leech Life, and Giga Drain. It can even be bred. But who is deciding to use these moves? Who is looking out from those eyes? The insect is gone. The Pokédex in Pokémon Gold says the bug host is drained of energy by the mushroom on its back. The mushroom appears to do all the thinking, the decision-making, the personality, the soul, all replaced by a fungus that has learned to mimic life so perfectly that it passes as a Pokémon in its own right. But the most haunting evidence is not in the words of the Pokédex, it is in the design itself, in the eyes. Paras has eyes, bright shining red eyes. They are expressive. They look up at you. They have a sense of self. Paras looks alive. Parasect has no eyes. Look at its sprite. Its eyes are completely white, blank, glazed over. The windows to the soul are painted shut. There is nothing looking back at you. The Pokédex in Pokémon Sword confirms why. It states that the mushroom grows so large that its host can no longer move. The resulting Parasect is effectively the zombie of its former self, controlled by the mushroom. The eyes are the windows to the soul. Parasect's windows are boarded up. The soul is gone. The lights are on, but nobody is home. The vessel walks. It fights. It scatters toxic spores across the battlefield. Imagine being a trainer who has raised a Paras from a child. You watched it grow. You fought alongside it. You made memories. You trusted each other. Then it levels up. It begins to evolve. There is no burst of light and happy new form. There is a silence. The creature turns to look at you, and its eyes are gone. The thing that looks back is not your partner. It is a fungus wearing your partner's skin. It still knows your commands. It still has your Pokémon stats and moves. It still follows you, but the part of it that loved you, the consciousness that bonded with you, the fungus does not need a heart. It does not need friendship. It just needs a host to continue spreading its spores. This is the true horror of the mushroom Pokémon. It is not just a scary story. It is a biological fact of the Pokémon world. Evolution was never a pathway to power for Paras. It was a pathway to death. And the thing that walks out of the evolution light is not a new form. It is the fungus that consumed the form completely, wearing it like a trophy. The mushroom Pokémon is not a creature. It is a conclusion, the final stage of a parasite that has perfected the art of identity theft. If nature can produce a creature that turns its host into a walking corpse, slowly erasing every trace of the mind that once lived there, we have to wonder what happens when humanity creates its own form of life, a being born not from a body, but from toxic sludge and industrial waste. That story waits in the next chapter, where we explore a Pokémon that calls a polluted river home, and the terrifying implications of sentient sludge and industrial horror. From the fungal horror of Parasect, where a creature's brain is consumed entirely by a parasitic mushroom, we step into a different kind of contamination, one that isn't born from the forest floor or the decay of a single organism, but from the collective filth of an entire civilization. This is the story of sentient sludge, of industrial waste that didn't just poison the land, but somehow gained a will of its own. And the evidence sits there in plain sight, in the Pokémon that we've all seen since the very first games. Grimer, Muk, and their gaseous counterpart, Weezing. You might remember Grimer as a simple purple blob, a pile of toxic goo that appears in sewers and polluted cities. But the lore behind it is far darker than a mere environmental hazard. According to the Pokédex entries from generation after generation, Grimer was literally born from sludge that was created by human industry. In Pokémon Red and Blue, the entry states that it emerged from the sludge that came from a factory. In later games, it's even more direct. The sludge that became Grimer came from the dumping of toxic waste. This isn't a natural Pokémon. It has no ancestor, no evolutionary link to a prehistoric creature. It is a manufactured life form, one that was never intended to exist. And that alone raises a disturbing question. What does it mean for a species to be born from our own negligence? Muk, the evolution of Grimer, takes this idea to its logical extreme. Its Pokédex entries describe it as so toxic that the mere touch of its body can cause plant life to wither and die. In Pokémon Gold and Silver, it says that Muk's stench is so powerful that it can cause fainting from a distance. And yet, these creatures are not just passive pools of poison. They are sentient. They move with purpose. They hunt. They defend themselves. They reproduce. The filthy sludge that we thought we could simply discard has become something that thinks, that feels, that adapts. Now consider this. What if the Earth itself is pushing back? What if the appearance of Grimer and Muk is not an accident, but a reaction? A theory that has persisted among fans and even echoes in the darker corners of the lore is that these Pokémon are the planet's immune response. When humans poison the land creates a creature that can consume that poison, concentrate it, and then perhaps return it. In Pokémon Sun and Moon, the Pokédex entry for Muk says that it eats garbage and spreads toxic fumes, but it also notes that it has occasionally been used to clean up pollution. It's a paradoxical relationship. The Earth manifests our filth as a living being, and then that being threatens to overrun us. But it's not just Grimer and Muk. There is also Weezing, the evolution of coughing, which is closely related to this industrial horror. Coughing itself is described as a Pokémon that was born from gases released by rotting garbage. Its body is filled with a noxious gas that can cause dizziness and choking. Weezing, with its 2 heads, is even more volatile. In the anime and games, these Pokémon are often found lurking in cities, around factories, or in the poison-type gym of Koga. But the deeper implication is that they are not just random monsters, they are symptoms. A world that produces coughing and wheezing is a world that is choking on its own waste. And here's the chilling part. These Pokémon are not mindless. In multiple Pokédex entries, hints of intelligence, of emotion. For example, the entry for Muk in Pokémon Fire Red says that it is a very dangerous Pokémon, but it also notes that it loves to eat garbage. That implies a preference, a desire. In Pokémon Let's Go, Pikachu and Eevee, it says that Muk enjoys eating filth and then spreading its toxic slime. That is not just a biological process, that is behavior, sentience. The planet's waste has become a conscious entity, and it is hungry. There is a particularly haunting piece of lore from the anime. In the episode, The Mysterious Pokémon of the Abandoned Power Plant, where a group of Muk and Grimer are discovered in an abandoned power plant. They had been feeding on the toxic residues left behind by human activity, and over time, they had grown in number and strength. The episode presents them as a problem to be solved, but it also shows them as a consequence. The power plant was abandoned because of pollution, and the pollution created the very creatures that now threaten to spread further. So the question becomes, are we breeding our own destruction? In the real world, we have seen the rise of toxic algae blooms, plastic islands in the ocean, and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. But in the Pokémon world, that metaphor becomes literal. The sludge does not just sit there, it gets up and walks. It evolves. It learns moves like Sludge Bomb and Minimize. It becomes a clear, violet-coloured juggernaut of toxicity, and the scariest part is that it can be trained, captured, used. A trainer can wield this pollution as a weapon or a tool. That moral ambiguity is central to the darkness of Pokémon lore. Now, let's step into the ecology of these Pokémon. They are found in urban areas, in garbage dumps in sewers. They are a sign of a broken environment, but consider the possibility that they are not the only symptom. If the Earth creates muck from toxic sludge, what else might it create? And what happens when these sludges become more intelligent, more organized, more human-like? In the Unova region, there is a species of Pokémon called Trubbish and Garbodor. They are literally piles of garbage that have become animate. Their Pokédex entries state that they are born when a pile of trash is exposed to a specific chemical reaction from a factory. That's the same origin story, repeated in a different generation. The pattern is clear. Human waste begets Pokémon, but here is where the theory deepens. Some believe that these Pokémon are not just accidental mutations. They are the Earth's way of manifesting human filth, a kind of planetary antibody. Just as our immune system creates white blood cells to fight infection, perhaps the planet creates these Pokémon to contain and process our pollution. The problem is that they are not always controllable. They can become a plague themselves. The Pokédex for Muk in Pokémon X says that it can dissolve most objects with its corrosive body. In Pokémon Y, it says that its slime can eat through stone. This is not containment, this is escalation. And there is a historical note that makes this even more unsettling. The early games, particularly Red and Blue, had a strong environmental theme. The Pokémon Mansion on Cinnabar Island, for example, contains journals that describe experiments with Mew and the creation of Mewtwo. But also in that mansion, you find wild coughing and Grimer. The industrial horror is woven into the very fabric of the Kanto region. Factory pollution, oil spills, garbage. These are not just backdrops, they are the origins of entire species. In the future, when we talk about Lieutenant Surge and the Great Pokémon War, we will see another facet of how humanity's actions have shaped the world of Pokémon. But for now, sit with this image. A lump of toxic sludge born from a pipe, leaking out into a river, and then slowly over time developing a consciousness. It begins to move. It begins to seek. It begins to hunger. And it remembers where it came from. It remembers the humans who made it. That is the sentient sludge. That is the industrial horror. And it walks among us. We left off with the last chapter swimming in the murky waters of human filth, the birth of Grimer and Muk, as living embodiments of our own waste. It's a grim mirror, a reflection of what we discard coming back to haunt us. But what happens when the poison isn't just a byproduct of industry, but the weapon of war itself? When the battlefield becomes so saturated with suffering that it reshapes the very fabric of a region, leaving scars not just on the land, but on the population. That's the story we're stepping into now. And it begins with a man who calls himself the Lightning American. You meet him in Vermilion City, standing inside a gym that smells of ozone and sweat. He's loud, brash, and he doesn't mince words. His name is Lieutenant Surge, and if you listen closely to what he tells you, the whole world of Pokémon shifts into something darker than you ever imagined. He says, "My Pokémon saved me during the war. They were my comrades. Without them, I'd be dead." Those words, spoken so casually in the original games, are a bomb with a long fuse. A war, not a skirmish, not a gym battle, not a petty conflict between rival trainers. A full-scale war. And not just any war, but one where Pokémon fought alongside humans as soldiers. Surge's dialogue is the only direct mention we ever get of this conflict in the early games. But it's enough to rewrite the entire history of Kanto. Think about what that implies. If there was a war, and it was recent enough that a gym leader in his prime served in it, then the world we explore as a 10-year-old is a post-war world. A world that's still healing, still rebuilding. And if Surge's Pokémon saved him, then the war was brutal enough to kill soldiers, leaving survivors scarred. But the most chilling part isn't Surge himself. It's what his presence says about the rest of Kanto. Look at the game. Where are the fathers? Where are the adult men? Everywhere you go, it's children running around, elderly professors, and the occasional woman like Misty or Lorelei. But the fathers are conspicuously absent. There's a reason your character's father is never mentioned in the games. The theory that has haunted fans for decades is that this war decimated the adult male population of Kanto. Now, let's sit with that. The Pokémon world, as we first experienced it in Red and Blue, is populated almost entirely by children and the elderly. You have Professor Oak, an old man. You have gym leaders like Brock, who is a teenager, Misty, a child. Even the champion Blue is a kid. The only adult men with any consistency are Team Rocket grunts, and they're the villains. But where are the normal dads? Where are the fathers going to work, coming home, teaching their sons how to throw a Pokeball? They're missing because they died. They died in the war that Lieutenant Surge survived, the war that left Kanto hollowed out, a generation of sons without fathers. A world where a 10-year-old is sent on a dangerous journey because there's no one else to do it. It's a world built on the bones of the dead. And Surge, the Lightning American, is the walking memorial. He's not just a gym leader, he's a veteran. He mentions his Pokémon saved him, but he never says what he saved them from. Was it another region's army? Was it a Pokepoison gas, like the Mook we just discussed? Or was it something even worse? Something that turned the land itself into a weapon. The fact that he's called the Lightning American suggests he fought in a war that crossed borders. His name implies he's not even from Kanto originally. He came from somewhere else, maybe from the real-world equivalent of the United States. And he stayed after the conflict ended. But why would he stay? Perhaps because his homeland was gone, or because he had nowhere else to go. The theory of a massive conflict that decimated the adult male population fits perfectly with the emptiness of the roots. You rarely see anyone over the age of 30. The only adults are either scientists or criminals. The entire economy of Kanto seems to run on child labour, with kids delivering parcels, taking on trainers and challenging gyms. And why is that? Because there's no one else left to do it. The war took everyone between the ages of 18 and 35. It took the fathers, it took the uncles, it took the brothers. And what remained was a society that had to rely on its youth to rebuild. That's why Professor Oak sends you on your journey at the age of 10. He needs a new generation to fill the void. Let's go back to Surge's dialogue. He says, "My Pokémon saved me during the war." Think about the word saved. It's not helped me win a battle. It's not assisted me in a mission, it saved me. He was in a situation where he would have died without them. That implies a level of violence and danger that is absent from the cheerful gym battle you're about to fight. The war was probably horrific, and if it was recent, then the scars are still fresh. The Lavender town we visited earlier, with its ghostly Pokémon and the Tower of the Dead, takes on a new meaning. Is that tower for the Pokémon who died in the war, or for the humans? The Marowak ghost we encounter there is the mother of a Cubone, but perhaps she was a casualty of the war as well. The demographic shift is not just a theory. It's the only thing that makes sense of the world. Why are there so many orphans? Why is the Pokémon League run by a young champion? Why do you, the protagonist, never mention your father? The answer is the war. The war is the hole at the center of Kanto's story. It's the reason why Team Rocket could rise to power, preying on a weakened society. It's the reason why the world feels so empty, so quiet, so full of children and the elderly. It's the reason why Lieutenant Surge stands in his gym, a monument to survival, but also a reminder of what was lost. And now, as we leave Surge and his electric shocks behind, we have to wonder, was Kanto the only region that suffered? Or were there other wars, other conflicts that reshaped other lands? There is a story, whispered in the ruins of an ancient kingdom, about a weapon so terrible it could end all wars. A man named AZ built it and he used it, and the cost was unimaginable. That story waits for us in the next chapter, with a machine called the Ultimate Weapon, and a king who still walks the earth, carrying the weight of his own terrible creation. But that is a tale for another night, and we will delve into it soon enough. For now, let Surge's words linger. War changes everything, and in the world of Pokémon, it changed everything forever. The war that Lieutenant Surge spoke of, the one that saved him and scarred a generation, was not the first time Pokémon became weapons in human hands. It was not even the worst. For that, we have to travel back 3,000 years, to a kingdom built on the backs of creation itself. The Kalos region is beautiful. Its rolling hills, its grand cities, its ancient forests, they all hide a history that the textbooks refuse to write down. At the heart of that history stands a man named AZ. He was a king, not the kind who sits on a throne and rules from afar, but a king who believed he could rewrite the laws of life and death. AZ had a Pokémon partner, a close friend, a companion since childhood, and when that Pokémon died, AZ could not accept it. He was the ruler of Kalos, a land of immense natural beauty and technological potential. He had resources, craftsmen, and a desperation that no amount of gold could cure. So he built something terrible. He built the ultimate weapon. The machine was not designed to destroy. It was designed to reverse the irreversible, to draw upon a source of power so vast that even death would have to retreat. But what fuel could possibly power such a miracle? The answer is the darkest truth in Kalos history, the souls of Pokémon. Thousands upon thousands of Pokémon were gathered, not by battles, not by natural selection, but by systematic slaughter, a genocide. The king ordered the capture of every Pokémon could reach, and then he forced them into the core of his weapon. Their life energy, their very essence, was drained into the machine as fuel. The screams of 1,000,000 dying creatures became the engine of his hope, and it worked. The weapon fired, and the burst of energy was so immense that it reshaped the land. AZ's partner Pokémon was brought back to life, standing before him once more, but the cost was beyond comprehension. The machine did not discriminate. The energy wave that resurrected one also devastated the region, killing countless others, leaving craters and scars in the earth that are still visible today. AZ got his friend back, but his friend looked at him with new eyes. It saw what he had done. The river of blood, the mountains of ash, the genocide that stained every inch of Kalos. And the Pokémon fled. It left him. AZ became a wanderer, a ghost who lived for 3,000 years, unable to die, cursed to remember every soul he had burned. The evidence for this is not just legend. In the Pokémon games, you can visit the remains of the ultimate weapon in what is now known as Team Flare's secret base. You can read the journals, See the machinery and hear the testimony of AZ himself. He is over 3,000 years old, still walking the earth, still carrying the weight of that decision. The Pokédex entries for the legendary Pokémon Xerneas and Yveltal, the embodiments of life and death, are linked directly to the weapon. Xerneas gives eternal life. Yveltal drains life away. The weapon used both forces, a perversion of nature. The devastating consequence was not just the immediate death toll, it was the corruption of the very relationship between humans and Pokémon in Kalos. The region's history became a cycle of fear, secrecy, and technological obsession. Team Flare, centuries later, would try to use the same technology for their own twisted goal of a beautiful world, only to repeat the tragedy. The weapon's design was hidden, but its scars were permanent. And that is the truth behind the ultimate weapon. A king's grief turned into an atrocity, a Pokémon genocide that powered a resurrection machine, and a 3,000-year-old king who walks among us as a reminder that some prices are too high to pay, even for love. This story leads directly to the next chapter, where we will examine the full scope of that ancient holocaust. It is a story that goes by a single name, the 3,000-year genocide, and what you will learn there will change how you see every Pokémon you have ever caught. 3,000 years ago, a war ravaged the land that would one day be known as Kalos. It was not a war between Pokémon. They were the pawns, the soldiers, the fuel. It was a war between people, and it burned for so long that neither side could remember what started it. In the midst of this endless conflict, one man held the power to end it all. His name was AZ, and he was the king of that shattered region. He had lost the one thing in the world that meant more to him than victory or peace. His Floette, his partner, his companion, his dearest friend, had fallen in the battle, and AZ made a decision that would echo across 3 millennia. He would build a machine that could reverse death itself. But the cost of that power was the lives of countless other Pokémon. He didn't just sacrifice a few, he orchestrated a systematic slaughter, channeling the life energy of thousands upon thousands of innocent creatures into the ultimate weapon. When the weapon fired, it did not just resurrect one Floette, it also annihilated the armies that had been fighting, ending the war in an instant. The king had won, but at what price? Floette came back to life. She opened her eyes, and she saw what her king had done. The piles of bodies, the rivers of blood, the land scarred by the weapon's energy. She could not bear it. She left him, taking the weapon's key with her, and disappeared into the world. AZ was left alone, immortal, cursed to wander the earth for 3,000 years, forever reminded of his crime by the eternal flower he still carried. The war had torn him apart, not just from his kingdom, but from the very Pokémon he had sought to save. He became a ghost in his own story, king without a throne, a man who traded the lives of many for the love of one, and the one he loved could not stand to look at him. The war itself was a crucible of grief. It consumed the region for years, and in that time, countless Pokémon were forced into battle, treated as weapons, discarded when they fell. The death toll among Pokémon was staggering, but it was the final act of genocide, the deliberate sacrifice of entire populations to power the weapon, that defined the era. The ultimate weapon was not a tool of war in the traditional sense. It was a machine that fed on life itself. The energy required to bring one Pokémon back from the dead was equivalent to the energy given off by thousands of dying souls. AZ's grief blinded him to the horror of what he was doing. He saw Floette's face and he saw nothing else. But the citizens of Kalos and the world beyond did not see the same savior. They saw a tyrant who had turned the bond between trainer and Pokémon into a furnace. When the weapon fired, the energy did not simply disappear. It radiated out across the land, infusing the very earth and the stones that lay within it. That energy crystallized over centuries into what we now know as Mega Stones. These stones, when held by a compatible Pokémon and activated by a trainer's keystone, allow a temporary evolution beyond the normal limits of the species. This is not a natural evolution. It is a forced mutation, are tapping into the leftover power of that ancient genocide. Every time a trainer Mega evolves a Pokémon, they are drawing on the same energy that once ended a war and created a king's eternal regret. The process alters the Pokémon's biology, sometimes in ways that seem almost painful, more aggressive, more powerful, more unstable. The stones themselves are relics of trauma, and the changes did not stop there. The weapon's blast also affected the DNA of Pokémon across the region. Certain species that had never before evolved gained new forms, new abilities. The lore of Kalos is filled with legends of Pokémon that discovered hidden powers after the weapon fired. The very fabric of evolution was rewritten by the machine. This is why Mega Evolution is not a universal phenomenon. It is localized to certain regions and certain Pokémon, because those are the ones that were exposed to the energy, or descended from those who were. The world's biology was permanently altered by one man's choice. Now consider the journey that every Pokémon trainer embarks on. The simple, almost innocent quest to catch them all, to fill the Pokédex, to challenge gyms and become the champion. But that journey is built on the same foundation that AZ laid. The Pokéball, the mechanism of capture, is a tool of control. The battles we fight are echoes of the war that tore a king apart. Every time we send a Pokémon into battle, we are participating in a cycle that began with the exploitation of these creatures for human gain. The genocide of 3,000 years ago made possible the world we now explore. The ancient towers, the hidden caves, the mysterious stones, all of it is stained by that original sin. The phrase, "gotta catch 'em all," becomes chilling when you realize what that means in the context of the lore. You are not just collecting friends. You are capturing living beings who were once used as fuel for a weapon of mass resurrection. The very act of owning a Pokémon carries the weight of that history. The game does not force you to think about it. It lets you play, bond, and forget. But the lore is there, waiting beneath the surface. The massacre of thousands of Pokémon is the silent foundation upon which the entire franchise rests. And what of Floette? She is still there, somewhere in the world of Pokémon. In the post-game of Pokémon X and Y, you can find a mysterious woman in a field of flowers near the site of the ultimate weapon. She speaks of an eternal flower, and she may be the same Floette who left AZ. She has not forgiven him. She cannot. But she also cannot leave the world that her resurrection created. She watches over the eternal flower, a symbol of both love and destruction. She is a living reminder of the cost. AZ himself wanders, eventually being reunited with Floette in the game's narrative. But the damage is done. The war, the weapon, the genocide. These events are not just backstory. They are the reason the Pokémon world is the way it is. The Mega Stones, the powerful evolutions, the very structure of the trainer's quest, all trace back to that moment of sacrifice and madness. The 3,000-year genocide is not a legend dismissed by scholars. It is a historical fact within the canon, and it forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the bond between humans and Pokémon. Is it a bond of friendship, or is it a bond of convenience, built on a history of death and manipulation? Perhaps the answer is both. The beauty of the world we love might be inseparable from its tragedy. This might make you wonder, if the very act of catching Pokémon is tainted by that original sin, what else have we been misled about? Perhaps the Pokédex itself holds the most terrifying truths of all. The entries that describe Pokémon habits, diets, origins. They might be more than simple facts. They might be confessions. Our next chapter, the Pokédex, a record of terror, will explore just how much horror is hidden in plain sight within its pages, and what it reveals about the true nature of the creatures we call our partners. The weapon fired 3,000 years ago. We can trace the fallout of that moment in the very bones of the Kalos region, in the stones that allow Pokémon to shift into forms of pure amplified trauma. But the legacy of AZ's grief and destruction didn't just create the Mega Stones. It created a need for a record, a log of what went wrong. This brings us to the device that sits in the pocket of every 10-year-old who walks into the tall grass for the first time, the Pokédex. We are told it is a scientific tool, a high-tech encyclopedia designed to catalogue the creatures of the world in the spirit of discovery. But look closer at the words it contains. Look past the illustrations and the type matchups. The Pokédex is not a field guide. It is a warning manual. It is a list of survival advisories drafted by a world that knows exactly how dangerous its inhabitants have become. Think about the very first entry most players encounter. The professor hands the device over with a warm smile, a gentle push into the open world. But what is the professor actually sending you to document? He is not sending you to count the Pidgey in Viridian Forest for biodiversity metrics. He is not running a census. He is sending you out so you can read the truth for yourself, so you can understand that the world outside your window is not safe. The Pokédex entries are a slow drip revelation of a planet in a state of constant emergency. Consider the structure of the entries. In the beginning, the warnings are mild. A Pokémon that spits string, a Pokémon that uses a sleeping powder, nuisances that can be swatted away. But as you progress, as you venture further from the safety of the professor's lab, the tone shifts dramatically. It deepens. It darkens. By the time you reach Lavender Town, the entries are no longer biological observations. They are ghost stories written by the dead themselves. The entry for Marowak in the original games is not a bio. It is an elegy. It describes a spirit that haunts a specific floor of a specific tower because it cannot let go of its child. That is not science. That is a missing persons report from the afterlife. The Pokédex stops being a catalogue of life and becomes a testament to the horrific ecosystem that AZ's war and countless other tragedies created. Every entry is a confession of trauma. The professor knows this. He wrote the code. He collected the data. He knows that the thing called Drifloon looks like a playful balloon you might see at a carnival. But the official entry written into the system reads verbatim that it grabs the hands of small children and drags them away to the afterlife. That is not an observation of nature. That is a civic hazard warning. It is a dangerous entity bulletin issued to every trainer who might wander near a field where these things float. The role of the professor is the most unnerving aspect of this entire framework. Look at Professor Oak. Look at Professor Rowan in Sinnoh or Professor Sycamore in Colosse. They are handing a sophisticated piece of survival equipment disguised as a simple pocket computer to a child. Why? Because children are curious. Children will go into the caves where the Zubats swarm. Children will approach the haunted tower. The professor stays behind. He stays safe in his laboratory. He collates the data you transmit back, filing the incident reports on the monsters that tried to kill you. This is exactly why the entries get progressively darker as you advance through the adventure. You are not simply filling out a checklist of species. You are being granted clearance to access higher and higher threat levels. In the early routes, you are just learning the language of the warnings. The text is gentle. By the time you reach the back of a cave system or the summit of a frozen mountain, the Pokédex trusts you with the full, unvarnished truth. Consider the Yamask entry. The Pokédex tells you it carries a mask that was its own face when it was human. Sometimes it looks at it and weeps. The designers of the Pokédex could have described any physical trait, any battle behavior. Instead, they chose to tell you that this creature was once a person. It remembers being alive. It wanders the earth grieving its own humanity. That specific terror makes the warnings about Gramble frowning at children or Duskull, stalking, misbehaving kids, feel almost quaint by comparison. The escalation continues. The trauma is measured. The Pokédex describes a world of child-killing balloons, haunted stumps that are the ghosts of dead children, and psychic abductors that stalk schoolyards. The Hypno entries across multiple generations imply a predator hunting in the system. It is a pattern of behavior that the Pokédex explicitly documents so that you, the reader, know who to avoid. The Pokédex is not a record of life as we understand it. It is a record of survival. It is a manual for navigating a graveyard. It is the set of instructions your parents never gave you. written by a generation that lived through the fire. When you look at the whole body of text, the inconsistencies vanish. The lore from every generation becomes a cohesive narrative of a world that suffered an extinction-level event and lived, but lived scarred and angry. The Pokédex is the comprehensive log of those scars. It is a document that tracks the evolution of a haunted world. If this single timeline is so fractured that its encyclopedia reads like a horror novel, what happens when the boundaries between worlds break down? What does a warning manual do when the fundamental rules of the universe, life, death, physics, are suddenly optional? What happens when you enter a place where the logic the Pokédex was built to describe no longer applies? That is exactly where the truth of this universe leads us. The structure of reality itself flexes at the edges. The distortion world, and the multiverse it implies, challenges everything the Pokédex was ever designed to catalogue. We ended the last chapter with the Pokédex, a record not of discovery, but of terror. The entries grow darker the deeper you go, as if the game itself is warning you that the world you thought you knew is built on a foundation of hidden horrors. But what if the Pokédex wasn't just cataloguing the creatures of one single reality? What if the entries we read are fragments from multiple timelines, each one a broken branch on a tree of countless failures? This is where the multiverse enters the conversation, and where the conspiracy theories shift from whispers in the underground forums to something almost validated by the games themselves. In the Alola region, we first encountered ultra wormholes, rifts in space and time that tore open the sky, allowing creatures known as ultra beasts to slip through. These were not Pokémon in the traditional sense. They were invasive entities from alternate dimensions, and the games were explicit about what happened inside those worlds. In the world of the ultra beasts, humans are prey. The entries for Nihilego, Buzzwole and Pheromosa describe them as predators that hunt humans for sport or sustenance. One dex entry for Buzzwole says it drives out its enemies using its muscular strength, but it's the way they move through our reality that matters. They don't belong here. They are visitors from a place where the rules of life are different, where the food chain is inverted, and where you are not at the top. And yet, the ultra wormholes are just one door. There is another door, older and stranger, hidden in the heart of the Sinnoh region, the distortion world. This is the domain of Giratina, the renegade Pokémon, banished for its violence. But the distortion world is not simply a prison. It is a place where physics unravel. Up becomes down, time loops back on itself, and solid ground flows like water. The game allows you to walk on walls, to fall upward, to stand on surfaces that should not exist. And here's the part that chills the calmest of voices. The distortion world is not bound by the same laws of life and death. It is a pocket dimension where the dead might wander, where the concepts of alive and not alive become meaningless. The Pokémon that reside there, Giratina, but also others we never see, exist in a state that our minds cannot properly categorize. This brings us to the darkest theory of all, that the Pokémon world we know and love is just one of many failed timelines. The idea isn't new to fiction, but the games sneak it in through subtle cracks. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, we learn of a meteor that would have destroyed the world if not for the intervention of Mega Rayquaza. But what if there are timelines where that meteor hit, where the world ended? The existence of parallel dimensions is confirmed by the Delta episode, where Zinnia speaks of other worlds, very matter-of-factly. And then there's the distortion world itself, a place that exists outside the stream of time, a scar left behind by the original creation of the universe. If the Pokémon multiverse is real, then every decision, every victory, every defeat creates a new branch, and some of those branches are dead ends. Worlds where the wars of Kalos succeeded, where the ultimate weapon wiped out all life. Worlds where the burned tower never rose again. Worlds where humans never befriended Pokémon, but became their prey. The evidence is scattered across generations. The Unown, those floating hieroglyphs, are said to connect dimensions. The Sinjol ruins, where Arceus was summoned, exist in a liminal space between regions, and in Pokémon Sun and Moon, the Ultra Recon Squad travels between worlds through wormholes, reporting back that their own world was ravaged by an entity called Necrozma, a being that consumed light itself. That world nearly died. It was saved only because Necrozma fled into our dimension. So where does that leave us? It leaves us standing on a precipice. The multiverse theory is no longer just fan speculation. It is a mechanical part of the lore, confirmed by official sources. The Pokémon world is not the center of existence. It is one fragile bubble in a sea of infinite bubbles. And some of those bubbles are already burst. Some are flowing with poisoned air. Some are ruled by the dead. And this leads us to the final truth. The one that ties all these threads together. The theory that the entire Pokémon world, every region, every trainer, every Pikachu, is built on the bones of the deceased. That the ghosts you encounter in Lavender Town are not anomalies, but echoes of a fundamental reality. That the world itself is a haunted house. In the next chapter, we will face that truth head on. We will look at the evidence that the Pokémon world is not a living world at all, but a world built on ghosts. A world where death is not the end, but the beginning of something far darker. Chapter 30, the final truth, a world built on ghosts. Last chapter, we stepped through the cracks in reality. We saw the ultra wormholes where humans become prey, and the distortion world where gravity and life themselves refuse to follow the rules. But what if those cracks were never flaws in the design? What if they were the only way to see the actual blueprint of the entire structure, the foundation upon which the whole world rests? Over the course of this series, we have analysed three foundational horrors. The horror of death, seen in the orphaned Cubone and the weeping spirits of Lavender Tower. The horror of war, recorded in the haunted eyes of Lieutenant Surge and the ancient genocide of Azid. The horror of resurrection, the forced rebirth of the legendary beasts from a burning Marpire, the screaming souls turned into Yamask, clutching their own human faces like forgotten luggage. These are not separate conspiracy theories. They are chapters of a single grim text. They are the history books of a world that has been killed and brought back so many times, where the original boundary between life and death was drawn. This brings us to the most uncomfortable realization of all, the bond between a trainer and their Pokémon, the core promise of the franchise, the handshake that bridges two worlds. What if that bond is not a bridge, but a bandage? A thin veil stretched over the gaping wound of a world built on ghosts. Every time a trainer sends out a Gengar, they are commanding the shadow of a dead Clefable. Every time they raise a Cubone, they are nurturing a child intrinsically linked to a mother it will never escape. The Pokédex tells us that Hypno abducts children, that Drifloon drags them to the afterlife, that Yamask weeps for the life it lost. We are told these things explicitly, but the games are designed so that the player never has to look directly at the horror. The game gives you anesthetized versions of these truths. It turns a kidnapping balloon into a cute companion. It turns a war scar veteran into a gym leader you can politely challenge. It turns the DNA of genocide into the power source for a trinket you wear on your wrist. The player character is not just a child exploring a world. The player character is a participant in this system. You are encouraged to capture these traumatized beings, to force them to fight again, to trade them like currency. The ultimate weapon was fired once by Azid, but the system of the Pokémon world, the act of catching and battling, fires that weapon every single day, on a smaller scale, over and over and over again. It is a world perpetually at war with its own restless dead. And yet, this is precisely why the franchise is so uniquely compelling for an adult audience. The surface of Pokémon is soft and welcoming, a blanket of primary colours and friendly smiles. But the deeper you dig, the more you realise that the softness is there because the edges are so unbearably sharp. The darkness is not a bug. It is a feature. It is the gravity that gives the light its weight. A story about true friendship and battling evil is a children's story. A story about finding meaning and connection in a universe built on the bones of the dead. where your partner is a ghost holding onto your hand to remember what it feels like to be alive. That is a story for life. That is a story that can grow with you. The final truth is not that Pokémon is secretly a horror game. The final truth is that the horror and the hope exist in the exact same space. The ghost is the shadow of the living. The darkness is the definition of the light. The bond between trainer and Pokémon is not damaged by this knowledge. It is deepened by it. When you look at your Pokémon now, you do not see a perfect pet. You see a survivor. You see a soldier who has been to war. You see a ghost who chose to stay. The world is built on ghosts, but you are the one who offers them a home. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thought in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.